You wake among red stones and silence, wondering why even the wind avoids this place. It's early. The kind of early that feels ancient. Before alarms, before jobs, before breakfast burritos. Just you, the raw hush of dawn, and a desert so vast it seems to curve away from itself. A few lizards dart off their tiny feet, leaving looping trails in the sand, but the air, still, not a whisper, as if the sky itself is holding its breath. You blink into the rust-colored light and stretch your sleeping mat creased with pebbles. A thin layer of dust has settled on everything: your boots, your bag, even your eyelashes. Welcome to the Painted Desert, Arizona's great silent riddle. It's beautiful in the way a fossil might be beautiful, all layers and memory. And there it is, that nagging feeling again, the same one that tugged at you miles ago when you crossed the little Colorado River. Why does the wind seem to stop here? You try whistling, nothing. The sound falls flat. You cup your hand and toss a pinch of dust in the air. It drifts straight down like it's bored. Now, to be clear, the wind exists here. Meteorologically speaking, it should blow through just fine. But what you're sensing isn't weather, it's mood. You've been in loud forests and breezy mountain passes, but this place has the personality of a sulking librarian. It's not just quiet, it's intentionally quiet. You start walking. Each step stirs powdery reds and faded oranges, as if you're disturbing paint that's still drying from millennia ago. The desert earns its name, honestly. Painted because the earth here blushes in every direction. No cactus silhouettes, no classic tumbleweeds. Just dry, rolling Badlands rock strata that look like they've been brushed on by a distracted god. Not far off, a ridge rises low, toothy and speckled with charcoal black outcrops. You're headed there, though you couldn't say why. It's like the place has its own gravity. And as you hike, a detail creeps in, the silence follows you. It's not that there's no sound, your boots crunch, your breath hitches, your pack straps creak, but the background noise of life seems edited out. No wind, no bird calls, not even the faint static of distant insects. It's the kind of quiet you feel in your bones. Historians still argue whether the earliest inhabitants of this desert came seeking visions or running from something. Either way, they left traces: buried potsherds, fire-blackened stones, and enigmatic petroglyphs carved into sheltered canyon walls. You pass one now, a spindly stick figure with spirals for eyes. Charming or cursed? Hard to say. Here's your first historical nugget. This desert was once home to the ancestral Puebloans, often labeled the Anasazi, a Navajo word that awkwardly translates to ancient enemies or ancestors of our enemies. Some folks now prefer the term Hisatsinom, especially among Hopi descendants. That's history for you, ever the awkward dinner guest, constantly correcting itself. And here's the quirky bit: somewhere out here, no one agrees exactly where there's a story of a shaman who married the wind. No, really. The tale goes that he climbed the highest bluff, offered his breath to the sky for 3 days straight, and came down with a wind wife who only spoke in whirlwinds. Cute in a chaotic relationship kind of way. You adjust your scarf and pause, listening harder. Still nothing. If that wind wife ever lived, she's long gone. Maybe she left after an argument. Maybe she's sulking. The ridge looms closer now, shadowed and broken like a collapsed jawbone. At its base you see the faint remains of what might have been a trail. Not a road, not even a proper path. Just a suggestion of movement, smoothed rock, disturbed sediment, the subtle choreography of people long gone. You remember reading that desert varnish, that blackish sheen on stone surfaces forms over thousands of years from bacteria, manganese, and wind-polished dust. But some of these rocks are clean, exposed, like something peeled them recently. But nothing has touched them right. You step into the shade of an overhang and touch one of the cleaned stones. It's warm, warmer than the air, almost pulsing. Maybe that's just the sun. Or maybe the wind used to come here and stopped. And then, as if to mock you, a single breeze stirs. It flutters past your cheek, thin, tentative, like a nervous guest late to a party. But the moment you turn your head toward it, it's gone. And in its absence, the stillness deepens. The old stories say the painted desert wasn't always dry. There were once lakes here, shallow and mineral-rich, where prehistoric fish, yes, real fish, darted between reeds. That was over 200 million years ago. They even found dinosaur tracks preserved in nearby rock beds, as if the creatures had been trying to walk away from something. You swallow your throat dry despite your water bottle's reassuring slosh. There's a reason people come here seeking answers. Vision quests, spiritual awakening, personal revelations. But there's also a reason people don't stay long. You move on past the ridge and deeper into the land's layered palette. Reds shift to purples, then slate grey. The trail fades entirely, and yet you still feel you're following something. A memory, a warning, a pull, and still the wind hesitates. You trace ghostly paths in the desert, sensing a people whose story was swallowed by sand. The ground beneath your boots feels older than the word memory. You don't so much walk here as sink into time, into layers, into the whispers of what once was. Every step brushes against an old footprint, now dust. The trail you follow isn't marked by signs or cairns. It's written in scuffs on stone, barely there depressions, and the kind of intuition you didn't know you had until this place started speaking to you in silence. It feels like someone walked this exact path 1,000 years ago. Maybe several someones, maybe barefoot, maybe carrying firewood or a secret or just boredom. That last one doesn't get enough credit. History loves its dramas, but forgets that entire civilizations were built between yawns and afternoon naps. Eventually you crest a small hill, and there it is, a ghost village almost perfectly aligned with the horizon. Not a single roof survives, of course, but the bones of the place remain stone walls, barely hip-high, arranged in neat quadrangles. You squint at the layout. It's too symmetrical to be random, too fluid to be military. This wasn't a fortress, it was a home. Historians estimate thousands of these villages once dotted the Four Corners region. Some were as small as a single family, others housed over 100 people. The builders, likely ancestral Puebloans again, or perhaps their cultural cousins, the Mogolon or Sinagua. Scholars still argue over who lived where and when, and honestly the locals probably would have shrugged and said, "We're just us." You cross into what was once a courtyard. The desert has reclaimed most of it. Tumbleweeds have curled into dry corners, and lizards scurry like nervous archivists. But here and there the shape of things persists, a grinding stone half buried in sand, the dark pit of a storage kiva, even the faint soot stains near what was likely a hearth. You reach down, brushing away the dirt around a small stone figurine. It's abstract, just a squat body and a sunburst head, but it radiates presence. Did a child play with this? Or was it tucked in a shrine meant to bless crops or keep away drought spirits. There's a common belief that the desert swallows what it doesn't like. But that's not quite true. The desert is more like a passive-aggressive librarian. It doesn't throw things out, it just misfiles them under M for maybe later. Still, it's hard not to feel the absence of noise here. No laughter, no trade calls, no dogs barking or kids chasing each other with sticks. Just you and the idea of what this place used to be. And again, no wind. You sit on a low wall trying to imagine daily life. The sun rising across these same ridges, smoke curling from these same fire pits, cornmeal being ground, baskets being woven, stories being told. Some of those stories would have been boring about whose turn it was to collect mesquite pods or how someone's cousin ruined the last rabbit stew. But some probably explained why certain trees mustn't be touched, or why the wind, once a loyal friend, began to stay away. Here's a mainstream historical fact for your mental scrapbook. Archaeologists believe that around 1100 to 1300 CE, many of these communities began to abandon their settlements. Theories abound: drought, overpopulation, resource depletion, social upheaval. But there's a subtle, almost poetic theory too, that they left, not because they had to, but because they were told to, by dreams, omens, or ancestors. And who's to say that isn't just as valid? Now for your fringe-flavoured tidbit, there's an old tale that one of these desert clans followed a trail of glowing insects deep into a canyon. The insects blinked blue and green in a perfect spiral, leading the people to a spring that had not been seen in decades. They stayed there for one season, then vanished entirely. The insects too were never seen again. Fireflies don't even naturally live out here. But hey, you're not here for logic. You shift your weight, and the stone beneath you groans slightly. Not a creak, not a crumble, a groan. Deep, resonant, like something remembering. You freeze breath caught, then silence again. Except now you're aware of how heavy the silence is, like it's pressing down. You stand and walk toward the far edge of the ruins. They're baked into the stone. You find handprints, tiny, spaced unevenly. Children, dancers. Panic. One theory suggests that some of these desert dwellers migrated gradually, joining other cultures to the south and east, blending into the Zuni and Hopi communities still alive today. Another theory suggests mass death, disease, famine, violence. And yet a third, popular among poets and the occasionally caffeinated, says they walked into the cliffs and never came back, literally disappeared into stone. And maybe that's why the wind hesitates. Maybe it remembers the day they left. Maybe it was their escort. Maybe it made a promise to return and then couldn't. A dust devil kicks up briefly behind the ruins, scattering dried brush and lifting a single feather high into the air. It floats for a heartbeat, just enough for you to feel something important is happening, and then drops straight down. Like it hit an invisible ceiling. You kneel, pick it up. It's grey, crow, dove. You turn it slowly in your fingers and then tuck it into your bag, a keepsake or a warning. You leave the village behind, following the edge of a dry wash, its bottom cracked like old skin. The sun climbs higher, sharpening shadows and bleaching colour from the land. Still no wind, still that silence with an attitude. Whatever happened here, the land hasn't forgotten. It just isn't telling you. Not yet. You reach a ruined observatory where sun priests once measured solstices with shadows. The day is warming now, not aggressively, just that slow, creeping kind of heat that makes you question your hydration strategy. Your boots crunch across cracked sediment each step, raising a puff of colour from the ground, ochre blush, pale lavender. This land wears more makeup than a 90s boy band. Ahead, something juts from a mesa's flank, angular. Man-made, or at least man-altered. You squint, it's a low structure half swallowed by time. Stone blocks arranged not as shelter but as geometry, a shape with a purpose. You climb carefully, hands occasionally brushing hot sandstone. From the top, the view is everything. The horizon slices the sky with razor precision, and the earth spreads out like a crumpled painting. You feel like you've stepped into a god's notebook, a rough draft. The structure, when you reach it, is no house, no kitchen, no hearth. It's not for living, it's for looking, for measuring, for catching something in motion that doesn't want to be caught. This is a solar observatory, or was. Some ancestral Puebloan sites, like the famed Fajada Butte in Chaco Canyon, were designed to track solstices with eerie precision. Here, you notice carefully placed stone slabs forming sightlines. Through one, if you crouch just right, you can see the exact notch in the horizon where the sun will rise at midsummer. Another slit frames the winter sunset. These weren't guesses, this was knowledge baked into stone. It hits you. They didn't just live with the sky, they spoke to it, they choreographed their lives around its breath. You sit on the cool stone and try to imagine the ceremonies, priests in painted masks watching the sun climb the moment of alignment, sparking gasps. Songs, maybe a sacrifice or two. Not people. Probably corn. Let's keep it PG. Here's a historical fact to hum along with. Chacoan engineers in the 9th to 12th centuries used roads and buildings that aligned to celestial events, solstices, equinoxes, lunar standstills. These weren't casual stargazers. They were architectural astronomers. Every placement meant something. Every stone was a promise to the sky. You feel that here. This place isn't random. The rocks speak angles. Now for your offbeat treat, local oral traditions tell of a sun lizard that lived in the rocks. A creature with mirror eyes that only opened when the solstice sun hit its home just right. The lizard didn't bite or burn it, whispered secrets about time. Don't ask how that works. Whispering lizards are above your pay grade. You slide into the shadow of a standing stone, thin, monolithic, and deeply etched with a spiral. Spirals are everywhere in this region. They appear in petroglyphs woven into pottery, carved into canyon walls. No one agrees what they mean. Migration water, the sun's path, the spiral of life. Or just prehistoric doodling historians still argue whether these symbols were spiritual metaphors, celestial charts, or family memes. What's odd here is how many spirals there are. Dozens. Some tiny and neat, others large and jagged, like they were scratched in haste or desperation. They crowd one another, as if someone kept redrawing the same idea again and again until it's stuck. You walk the perimeter, noting more slabs laid flat in the dust, stepping stones, or maybe markers. One has a circle within circle motif. Another has a groove worn into it so deep it could have been a grinding station, but it's facing the wrong way for comfort. More likely, it was a shadow tracker. You test the angle. The sun slices across the groove in a way that makes you flinch. It lines up perfectly with a distant ridge. You follow the line with your eyes and pause. There may be a mile away, a white boulder gleams in the sun, alone, shaped like a fang. And at its base, something dark, an entrance, a cave, a shadow, pretending to be deeper than it is. Something about it unnerves you. You break eye contact, smart. You sit again, close your eyes and listen. Still no wind, just the faint crackle of heat expanding in stone and the soft pop of a seed pod bursting somewhere down the slope. But no movement in the air. It's like the wind respects this place too much to intrude. Or maybe it was once invited here and never left, like a guest who overstayed its welcome and now hides out of guilt. A hawk slices the sky in silence. You wonder who last stood here. Was it a young apprentice tasked with watching the shadows angle, or an old priest stiff with arthritis still faithful to the calendar when all else was falling apart? There's a story rare, mostly told around fires after too much mesquite beer, about the sun hopper, a man who misread the solstice and led his entire village to plant too early. The crops failed, the village scattered, and the man jumped off a cliff, ashamed. But the next year the sun rose in the wrong place. The priest had been right all along, and ever since the wind refused to correct the sky. It's a dark tale.
And oddly flattering to obsessive note-takers. Dust your hands rising. The observatory gives you no answers, but it confirms the question. Someone once spoke to the wind here. They charted its moods and mapped its shadows. Maybe they lost control of it, or maybe they asked too much. As you step back onto the descending trail, the heat pulses again, and for one flickering moment you hear a low hum. Not quite a whisper, not quite a song, but a tone ancient and reverent, sliding past your ears like breath held too long. You freeze, then it's gone. The wind, maybe, or just your blood echoing through your temples. Either way, the silence deepens, and the sun continues to rise exactly where it should. Strange pigments in the soil seem alive. Did the earth itself teach them to paint? You descend from the observatory, the stone sun watchers at your back, and begin to notice the colors again.
Not just the broad strokes, the red cliffs, the white striped mesas, the occasional daub of purple or yellow in the rocks, but something finer. The dust itself changes underfoot. One patch is a soft cinnamon hue, another leans toward bruised lavender. Yet another gleams almost metallic, like powdered copper left out too long in the rain. It's not just the view, the ground is a palette. You kneel and pinch a bit of the dust between your fingers. It's impossibly fine, almost like flour. A gust would scatter it if the wind would just cooperate and show up to do its job. But still the powder sits stubbornly in your palm, warm and dry, as if it remembers being part of something older, something painted. The ancient peoples of this region were artists, but not in the leisurely Sunday afternoon sort of way. Their pigments were prayers applied to stone walls, pottery and skin. They painted spirals, handprints, cloud symbols, and figures with arms raised to the sky. They painted the invisible. And somehow their paints are still here. You pause at a shallow alcove, just a sliver of cave wedged between two sandstone folds. Inside the wall is a riot of faded hues. Ochre reds, soft whites, earthy browns. And beneath it all the faint outline of a figure with no eyes and too many fingers. Okay? That's fine. Totally normal. You don't touch it, not because you're worried it'll flake off, because it feels like it's looking back, even with no eyes, especially with no eyes. Here's your mainstream historical fact. Many of these natural pigments came from hematite, limonite, azurite, and malachite minerals ground and mixed with fat water or plant oil. Some even used egg yolk or cactus juice as a binder. The artists knew their chemistry, knew what lasted. The colors weren't decorative, they were durable memory. Now for something more off-menu in certain Hopi tales. The first woman painted the desert, to keep it from vanishing. The earth, she said, was growing shy, retreating into itself, tired of being walked on without thanks. So she took colours from her blood, her tears, and her laughter, and painted the cliffs. The desert flattered, stayed put, and yet there are spots even now where the paint looks fresh. You lean in closer to a red streak that looks too vibrant, too glossy. Lick your thumb, dab. The mark doesn't smear. If anything, it darkens slightly like it's waking up. You stare at your thumb, clean. Historians still argue whether these colours were applied ritually, communally, or secretly. Some theories suggest only certain individuals, usually women or shamans, were allowed to mix pigments. Others think children helped with handprint walls as a kind of rite of passage. Others believe the colour makers weren't people at all, just the land staining itself. You step back into the sun eyes, adjusting from the cave's shade. Now with the light brighter, you start to notice that entire patches of ground are tinted, not randomly, in patterns. Long red streaks curve around a dry gully like veins. A greenish stain hugs the base of a slope. Blue flecks speckle a ridge like confetti from a forgotten ceremony. Did they find these colours and use them, or did they use the land because of them? Some archaeologists have pointed out that pigment-rich sites often align with sacred landmarks, springs, caves, celestial markers. That's science. But what about the less scientific theory that the pigments were a gift, a kind of language the desert gave to its caretakers? And when those caretakers left or vanished, the language stayed behind, hoping for a reply. You follow a red trail, wondering if it's a trick of light or intention. It leads to a shallow depression in the earth where the dust has settled in darker layers. You kneel, dig a little. Your fingers strike something hard. You uncover a small palette stone, smooth on one side, concave on the other. Bits of red and yellow cling to the inner curve residue. You hold it up and catch a glint. The pigment's still there. After hundreds, maybe 1,000 years. Left like an open book with a line half finished. Did someone get interrupted, or was it meant to be found? You sit back on your heels, turning the stone in your hand. You feel a vague pressure on the back of your neck. Not fear, just attention. Like someone's curious about what you're doing. You mutter nice colours to the air because it feels polite. Still no wind. The air's gone hot and slightly heavy, like a room just before a storm, but no clouds, not even a wisp, just that oppressive stillness that suggests something is watching, listening and waiting for you to say the wrong thing. You pocket the palette stone, not to keep, just to borrow. In the distance, another splash of colour, brighter this time, orange against grey, catches your eye. A cliff wall half crumbled, with a sunburst symbol painted high and crooked. It looks rushed, unfinished, like the artist ran out of time, or ran out of something more vital. There's a legend among the Zuni about a sun painter who tried to repaint the sun each night to keep it from dying. He failed once, just once, and that's the night the wind left. It couldn't bear to see the sun fall without a proper farewell. That might be a bedtime story for desert children, or it might be the most important thing anyone's ever said about this place. You walk on, and as you do, the colours seem to shift, not in hue, but in mood. The red becomes rustier, the greens dull. Even the rocks seem to fade a little, as if embarrassed to be seen. The trail narrows and your shadow stretches long in the late afternoon sun. You turn around, half expecting to see a figure behind you. There's no one, just your footprints.
And in the dirt beside them, tiny swirls of coloured dust gathering as if summoned by memory. Still no wind, but something stirs. You stumble upon a settlement with no entrances on the ground. Why were the homes sealed from below? By now the light is stretching long and golden, pulling shadows across the desert like spilled ink. Your path narrows, winding between low cliffs that hum with stored sunlight. You feel it under your feet, heat rising from stone each step, tapping into the memory of a day's worth of light. That's when you see it. Nestled in a shallow alcove high up the mesa wall, a village. No signs, no markers, just a quiet congregation of boxy stone structures balanced like teeth along the ledge. You climb carefully. The ascent is tricky, all loose rock and sharp angles, and you're aware acutely that the silence has returned to its full strength. No breeze, not even birdsong. The air presses close like wool.
As you crest the final ledge, the first thing you notice is the lack of doors. None at ground level anyway. The walls are smooth and unbroken, like the buildings are holding their breath. Only when you crane your neck do you spot the openings up top. Roof hatches, you blink. Rooftop access only, no steps, no handholds, no obvious way in. Why build homes like sealed boxes? What were they keeping out or keeping in? You circle, slowly eyes, scanning the details. The walls are made of carefully fitted sandstone blocks cemented with mud and patience. No crude huts here. These were crafted by skilled hands, likely in the 1200s or earlier. Historians associate this style with Mogollon and later ancestral Puebloan peoples, especially the Salado, who left similar high-walled, entrance-less homes across eastern Arizona. You find a ladder, or the remains of one, charred, broken, tucked beside a crumbled storage pit. Maybe they burned it when they left so no one else could follow, or maybe it burned itself. Desert wood has a mood. You climb the edge of one structure and peek in through the hatch. Dust floats in golden shafts of light. The room is empty, but it still feels occupied. Stone shelves along the wall, a smoothed-out sitting area, and in one corner a faint red handprint, small, deliberate. You sit beside the opening and let your legs dangle, thinking. It would have been cooler inside during the day, warmer at night. Practical. But the roof-only entrances suggest something deeper. Protection, ritual, containment, maybe all three. Here's your mainstream historical morsel. Rooftop-only access was common among cliff-dwelling cultures, partly for defense. Pull the ladders and you're safe from invaders, or wild animals, or nosy neighbors with strong opinions about corn storage. It's also easier to regulate airflow, light and smoke when everything rises. Now for the fringe snack. Some stories claim these homes were sealed to protect dreams. The idea was that nightmares like bats could only enter through low doors. By entering from above, symbolically descending from the spirit world, you kept the bad spirits guessing. Or stuck outside, depending on how polite they were. You peer inside another room, slightly larger. Its walls are painted, not murals, just bands of colour. A soft grey-green stripe along the bottom, faded red up top. The colours don't match the desert palette. They feel imported or ceremonial. Like the room was dressed for company it never got. You find a fire pit with cracked bones beside it, not human goat maybe, or deer. But what catches your eye is the ring of small stones surrounding the ashes, arranged in a spiral. You're starting to suspect the desert has a favourite shape. Historians still argue whether spiral symbols were maps, clocks, or metaphysical doodles. One theory proposes they marked portals either spiritual or seasonal, or maybe they were just pretty. The ancient world was allowed to have aesthetics too. You return to the ledge and gaze across the land. From here, you can see the sinuous wash of a dry riverbed, the crooked silhouettes of other cliff faces, and far in the distance, a thunderhead. But no wind. The clouds are stalled, holding their breath like the buildings. There's a story told by the Hopi about a group of people who sealed themselves inside stone homes to survive a storm that never came. They heard the warning in a dream wind, howling skies splitting open. So they built, quickly, sealed the doors, climbed in through the top. Then they waited, and waited, and nothing happened. The dream hadn't lied, it had simply arrived too early, centuries too early. And when the real storm did come, they were long gone. You wonder what dreams these walls were built to contain, or silence, or shelter. You rise and walk the perimeter of the ledge, careful not to look down. Heights aren't usually a problem, but the hush here is unnerving. It feels like if you slipped, the desert might simply erase the sound of your fall. A stone falls behind you, just one. You spin. No one there, of course. You glance up at the thunderhead again. Still distant, still stalled. You speak aloud just to test the air. Anyone still home? Your voice bounces once, then falls flat. The silence closes back in like a lid. You begin to descend, leaving the ladder ghosts and sealed dreams behind. As your boots touch the canyon floor, you notice something peculiar. Tiny feathers, not scattered, arranged. A path of them, leading forward. Still no wind, but the air feels expectant now, like something's about to be remembered. And you keep walking the village above you, closed up tight as though even the stones don't want to talk about what happened next. You touch stones that seem to whisper back. Was this the wind speaking or memory itself? The feather trail disappears after a few hundred paces, vanishing into gravel like a dream you forget, mid-sentence. You pause. Behind you, the cliff dwellings crouch in silence. Ahead, the land flattens into a wide, pale basin where the sky presses low. The kind of sky that feels personal, intimate, uncomfortably aware of your presence. And just ahead, rising from the center of the basin, like the vertebrae of a long-dead creature, is Awatovi, or what's left of it. The ruins appear at first as a heap of stone piles that might be natural. But as you draw closer, shapes resolve. Corners, angles, intentions. Wall segments rise chest-high in places all in sandstone and adobe, whispering of structure, of community, of memory, wearing a very convincing mask of collapse. This isn't your first ruin of the day, but this one feels different. Not because of how it looks, but because of how it listens. You step between two fallen walls and immediately the air feels different, thicker, not heavier, but denser somehow, like sound travels differently here, like the space is holding its breath, waiting to see what kind of visitor you are. Here's your mainstream historical breadcrumb. Awatovi was once a thriving Hopi village dating back at least to the 13th century and surviving well into the 17th. It housed ceremonial chambers, artisans, and a community steeped in both tradition and adaptation. Spanish friars even arrived here, briefly establishing a mission during their kind suggestion period of conversion. It didn't end well. You rest a hand on a wall. It's warm, which is expected under this sun, but it's the texture that makes you pause. The sandstone is worn smooth, not by wind or rain, but by touch. Hands, countless of them, over centuries, and then you feel it. A vibration, subtle, Rhythmic, not seismic, not quite internal either. More like humming. You pull your hand back. The sensation stops. You touch it again. There it is. Is the stone singing? You press your ear to it, just to be ridiculous, just to say you did. And for one impossible second, you swear you hear whispers, not in a language you know, not even syllables really, just the shape of voices, the idea of breath moulded into sound. You jerk your head back. Silence. This is fine, this is normal. There's an odd little detail you notice as you walk the perimeter. The rooms are unusually close together, almost huddled. There's very little wasted space. It's like the buildings were trying to keep warm or confide in each other. You pass several doorways no taller than your shoulders, leading into tiny rooms with soot on the ceiling. Cooking rooms, maybe. But one in particular has no door at all, just a wall of stone with a strange, lumpy bulge in its center. You walk around it expecting to find the opening on the far side. Nope. The bulge, it turns out, is an embedded stone mask, or at least what looks like one. Eyes, hollowed mouth, a soft oval, crude but expressive. The kind of face you'd make if someone told you the moon had opinions about you. Why place a mask in the wall? Decoration, protection, punishment. Now for your fringe folklore of the day. Awatovi, according to some Hopi accounts, was destroyed from within, not by drought, not by invaders, but by betrayal. The story goes that sacred ceremonies were corrupted, outsiders were let too far in. And so one bitter winter night, other Hopi villages attacked and burned it to the ground. A cleansing, a silencing. The wind hasn't spoken here since. Historians still argue whether this account reflects an actual military campaign or a more symbolic collapse, religious schism, social rift, or internal rot. But one thing's agreed upon. After Awatovi fell, it was never rebuilt. Other villages carried on, Awatovi did not. It became a wound, then a scar, then a whisper in the stones. You walk into what remains of a kiva, a ceremonial chamber dug partially into the earth. The floor is cracked. The ladder is long gone. But there's a shaft of light cutting through the roof, opening dust drifting lazily in its path. In the beam you see tiny motes swirling in a spiral. Of course, you sit on the edge and dangle your feet into the cool shade of the chamber. The spiral motion of the dust is mesmerizing, slow and rhythmic, like a breath you forgot you were holding. It's peaceful, almost too peaceful, like a calm that follows a fight you didn't witness. There's a tale barely told anymore of a wind that used to live in kivas. Not blow through them, live in them. It would help with ceremonies, carry prayers, skyward shake rattles at the right time. But when its favorite kiva was sealed shut forever, the wind refused to return. Not out of anger, out of grief. You drop a pebble down into the kiva. It lands with a faint pat, and the dust spiral halts instantly. No gust. Just stillness, as if the pebble had insulted someone very quiet and very old. You don't apologize out loud, but you think it really hard. As you leave Awatovi, the sun dips lower, casting long shadows that lean like exhausted dancers. The walls catch the golden light and glow like fading coals. You pass one last stone and rest your hand on it in farewell. No hum this time, but the warmth lingers a little longer than it should. Still no wind, but you feel watched, not by a presence, but by memory. And the silence around you is no longer passive. It's personal, You uncover ceremonial masks. Soot-stained and grinning were these protectors or prison wardens. Evening slinks into the desert like a cat with secrets. The sky bruises purple, then slides toward ink. Somewhere behind you, the bones of Awatovi settle deeper into the silence, as if relieved you're finally leaving them alone. You wander farther east, where the land wrinkles and buckles into low hills. The colours here dim like someone turned down the saturation. Shadows sharpen. Rocks grow teeth. You keep moving. Soon you spot a shallow cleft in the hillside, just wide enough to invite trouble. You hesitate at the entrance. Something about it feels too deliberate. Not a natural erosion, but a choice, a made space. You duck inside. The passage narrows quickly. Dust floats in shafts of fading light. Your boots scrape over ancient ground. The air is cooler in here, not cold, just calm. Like an exhale caught in stone. After a few paces, the passage widens into a low chamber, and there they are, masks. At least a dozen of them arranged haphazardly along a cracked bench carved into the rock wall. Some lean forward. Others slump as if sulking. One has fallen and lies face up on the ground, grinning madly. They're made of all kinds of things. Clay, carved wood, animal bone. Most are charred around the edges, the soot clinging to them like shame. Their faces are strange, exaggerated brows, oversized teeth, eyes too wide or too empty. They stare back at you with the relaxed menace of someone who already knows how your story ends. You crouch beside the fallen one. Its light in your hand, clay thinned by fire. Painted once, but the colors have faded to ghost tones. There's a sun etched into its forehead, or maybe it's a flower, or an explosion. Interpretive ambiguity, the universal language of old art. Here's your historical grounding rod. Ceremonial masks were common among southwestern cultures. The Hopi, Zuni, and earlier tribes all used masks in religious dances, storytelling, and seasonal rituals. They weren't just disguises, they were invitations. Wear the mask, and you became the spirit it represented, sometimes for an hour, sometimes for good. But these don't look like they were worn in joy. These look like they were used against something. Their expressions are too sharp. Their mouths all open as if mid-scream or mid-spell. And the soot that suggests fire. Not celebration fire, something else. You pick up another smaller one. Bone. Probably deer. Smooth and cracked with age. Tiny holes near the temples suggest it was once tied tightly, maybe too tightly. You imagine it strapped onto a child's face or a shaman's or someone unlucky enough to be both. Did it keep something out or did it trap something in? There's a story, half whispered, rarely written, of a group called the Ash Mouths. Not a tribe, not a people, just a label. They supposedly lived in this region long before the Spanish and long before even the Hopi arrived. According to legend, the Ash Mouths didn't speak with their own voices. They wore masks that spoke for them. Masks that remembered every word ever spoken in the desert. They weren't evil per se, but they weren't welcome either. Historians still argue whether stories like these are metaphorical or echoes of forgotten fringe cults that left behind little more than nightmares and scorched clay. You set the bone mask down and turn toward the back of the chamber. A fire pit sits cold and blackened, but unlike the others you've seen, this one is ringed with melted glass. Not modern beer bottle glass. Ancient, probably sand, fused by intense heat. You run your fingers along the edge and find embedded in the slag a few small teeth. Human animal. The size says raccoon. The atmosphere says something else entirely. Above the fire pit, a niche in the wall holds one final mask. This one is different. It's smooth, symmetrical, made of obsidian, so polished you can almost see your reflection. But just off. As if the mask remembers your face a little differently. The features are simple: 2 eyes, no mouth. Where the mouth should be, there's just a shallow groove, like someone tried to carve it, then stopped.
Or was stopped. You stare into it too long. The silence in the chamber thickens, then pops just a tiny sensation like pressure releasing from a sealed jar. The air shifts slightly, cooler, sharper, then you hear it, a faint scrape. Behind you, you spin around, nothing. But one of the soot-streaked masks has tilted, only slightly, just enough to make you question whether it had been upright before. You blink, it doesn't move again. You stand slowly, nodding politely to the room as if excusing yourself from an uncomfortable dinner party. You back toward the narrow exit. As you leave, the silence resumes its full weight, but now it feels different. Not watching, not judging, waiting. Outside, the night has deepened. The desert glows faintly under a bruised sky, and stars begin to blink into place like they've been watching this whole time and are only now choosing to be seen. Still no wind, but the memory of fire clings to your skin. Not smoke, not heat.
Just the feeling that something once burned for a reason it refuses to share. You walk on knowing the masks are still there. Still grinning. Still listening. You find tiny feathers molded from clay, traces of bird spirits too sacred to name aloud. You walk through the dusk with the rhythm of someone who knows they're not alone, but isn't quite ready to admit it. The desert has softened around the edges. The rocks glow with that sleepy twilight warmth, like embers that forgot to go out. Above you, stars gather, slowly, deliberately, like witnesses returning to the scene. Ahead, a low slope rises a mesa's ankle, really. Its face is streaked with long ribbons of pale dust that catch what little light remains. As you approach, you notice the path beneath your boots begins to crunch. Not stone, not gravel, ceramic. You kneel. The ground is littered with tiny fragments. Some are jagged, but others are smooth, rounded, almost intentional. You pick one up. It's no bigger than your thumbnail. Curved, textured. Your fingers run along its surface, and then it clicks into place in your brain, a feather made of clay. You begin to notice more dozens of them, maybe hundreds, scattered across the slope, like the aftermath of a molting spirit. Some are delicate and detailed with grooves etched in careful parallel. Others are abstract, just the suggestion of a feather, a gentle arc, and a notched tip, but all unmistakably feather-shaped. You wonder, why would anyone make hundreds of feathers out of clay only to scatter them in the dirt? You gather a small cluster into your palm. They're weightless, but the moment you hold them, something inside the air changes. The silence sharpens, not louder, just clearer, like a lens snapping into focus. The stars above seem to blink faster. Your own heartbeat begins to feel like it's not entirely yours. Here's your historical thread. In several southwestern cultures, feathers were sacred conduit symbols of breath, wind, sky. They adorned headdresses, prayer sticks, and burial bundles. Real feathers mostly, from eagles, hawks, even hummingbirds. But in places where birds were rare, or their spirits too potent to pluck it, was said artisans would shape feathers from clay and ash and whisper prayers into them before firing. You let one of the clay feathers fall back to the ground. It doesn't bounce, just settles like a sigh. Now, for your fringier folklore fix, there's a whispering legend of the Cuckoo bird beings who live half in the sky, half in the stone. Not gods, not animals, something in between. They were said to visit children in dreams, leaving behind clay feathers as proof of their passage. If you found one, it meant you'd been spoken to in your sleep, and you were now a messenger, whether you liked it or not. You look around. The slope above you seems strangely smoothed, as if wind or something with wings has passed over it 1,000 times. Historians still argue whether these feather scatterings are ceremonial remnants or just debris from forgotten craft stations. Some claim they were used during wind-inviting dances laid out on the earth to mimic flocks in flight. Others suggest they were funerary offerings, each feather representing a soul trying to lift itself from the heavy dust. You climb the slope. Near the top, tucked into the crook of 2 boulders, is a low alcove. You nearly miss it. Inside, half buried by years of drifting grit, lies a clay tablet, cracked and faded. On its surface, rows of small etched birds, some mid-flight, others hunched, with wings folded. In the center, a spiral. Of course. But this spiral isn't rounded, it's jagged, angular, like lightning trying to imitate a snail, a warning spiral. Above the tablet, someone has pressed 3 clay feathers into the wall. They are blackened, fused, fired not in a kiln but in open flame, perhaps lightning or something close to it. You sit, suddenly tired. The feathers in your pocket, yes, you picked a few up, don't lie, seem to hum softly. Not in sound, but in weight. They want something, or remember something, or maybe they're just listening to the desert breathe. There's a story rarely told outside of ceremonies about a woman who made clay feathers for years alone by a cliff where the wind had once sung lullabies. She claimed she was rebuilding the flock, not of birds, but of voices. Voices the wind had once carried but dropped. Voices that needed to be gathered so they could rise again. When she died, the story says, the wind came one last time, not to mourn, but to carry her work away. And after that it never returned. You look up at the stars. They've multiplied while you weren't looking. Now they gleam like scattered seeds across a sky, just waiting for wind to plant them.
And yet the air remains still. Not heavy, not hostile, just absent. As you descend the slope, your boots crunching feathers, you feel oddly emotional. Not because the feathers are sacred, but because someone made them. Someone bent over damp clay day after day, shaping wind from mud, hoping that memory could take flight. You step away from the feathered hillside, dusting your hands, and glance back once. The scattered pieces glint faintly in the starlight, forming a shape you can't quite name. A bird maybe, or a word, or just a question without an answer. Still no wind. But now you feel its absence differently, not as a void, but as a presence withheld, like something choosing not to arrive. An old canyon hums beneath your feet. Did sound once shape the rocks? By now the desert has dissolved into a kind of half-light moonrise, flickering behind high ridges, stars sharpening into pins.
You walk in the soft blue hush between day's edge and night's beginning, where things feel more uncertain, more likely to shift if you blink too long. The trail, if you can call it that, leads you downward. The terrain changes subtly, less of the painted dust and more fractured sandstone. The very air begins to feel hollow. Like something large once lived here and left its echo behind. Your boots scuff the edge of a canyon rim you didn't see until you were almost in it. It's not massive, not one of those wide cinematic gorges with epic views and dramatic danger. This canyon is intimate, tucked between stone ridges maybe 30 feet across its walls, curved and strangely smooth, like the inside of a bowl, worn down by generations of hands. You step in carefully. Immediately you notice the sound, or more precisely, the way sound behaves. Your footfalls bounce. Your breath comes back to you softer than it should. You cough once, and the echo wraps around the canyon like silk, coiling through the rocks in ways that feel engineered. You test it. One soft clap. It answers from 4 directions, not harshly, musically. You hum, and something hums back, not mimicry, not pure echo, something deeper, lower. A sound that resonates like a tuning fork struck beneath the earth. You freeze, then do it again. The canyon answers differently this time, like it's choosing which part of you to repeat or ignore. Welcome to what locals once called Echo Mother's Mouth, a place where sound behaves like memory, never accurate, always intimate. Here's your mainstream fact: indigenous peoples of the Southwest, including the Pueblo and Hohokam, were deeply aware of acoustic architecture. Some ceremonial spaces, such as the kivas and cliff dwellings, were built to enhance sound intentionally, to make chants, fuller drums, louder prayers more present. Some of these spaces still produce reverb effects that modern engineers can't easily replicate. Now the weirder side, according to one legend never written, always spoken, this canyon was once part of a singing stone, a mountain that hummed constantly, even in sleep. The ancestors, it said, carved parts of it away, carefully creating resonant places across the land where the hum could still be heard. The leftover canyon, that was the throat. Historians still argue whether these humming sites are natural phenomena or deliberate constructions. Was the canyon carved by wind, water, and accident, or was it sculpted on purpose to retain a voice? You sit down on a flattish rock and try humming again. This time slowly, a single low tone. The canyon doesn't echo it. It adds to it. A low vibration builds under your spine. Your boots buzz slightly on the stone. Your hands tingle. The sensation stops as soon as you close your mouth. You rise and start exploring the walls. Faint carvings snake along the inner surface, not deep, not obvious. You run your fingers over spirals, yes, but also waveforms, curved lines in repetition, parallel grooves, like someone was trying to draw sound. One particular spot catches your attention, an alcove low to the ground, its wall so smooth it feels slick, even in the dry air. You crouch and whisper a single word. The word doesn't echo. Instead, the stone produces a note, a soft chime, low and sweet like a bell heard through water. Not loud, just precise. You sit back now, thoroughly weirded out in a peaceful sort of way. There's a tale told among some elders only at night, and only after long silences, about a girl who could hear the rocks sing. She followed the tones until she found the mother voice deep in the earth. But when she repeated its song aloud, the wind stopped in awe and never started again. Her family, unable to bear the quiet, carved the music into the canyon walls so her voice could be remembered even after the silence settled in. The humming stops abruptly. You rise uneasy, not afraid, just attended to. The canyon no longer feels like a place. It feels like a listener, a memory bank made of stone. You take one last slow walk along its edge, noting that certain rocks are chipped in patterns like keys on a xylophone. You tap a few with your knuckle. Some ring. Others answer with a soft thunk. Some remain dead silent. Maybe only some of them are awake. Maybe sound was once not just for communication, but for building, shaping, drawing form from vibration. There's real science now exploring how sound waves affect particles, sand, water, even structure. You wonder what the ancestors knew without needing laboratories or whiteboards. Still no wind, but the canyon feels full of breath. Yours and someone else's. As you leave, the path winds upward again, and the stars above now spill down the cliffs like lanterns knocked loose from some heavenly shelf. You climb without speaking. The last note you heard still buzzes softly in your chest. Not memory, resonance, and the wind still absent. Perhaps it's still listening, or remembering a song it once sang here long ago when the desert still had a throat. You recall a legend of a child who vanished, leaving only blue stones behind. You wake with the sound of stars. Or maybe it's just the blood in your ears, still humming from the canyon's secret song. Either way, dawn is a rumor, soft blue smudges on the eastern edge of the world, the kind of light that makes every rock look like it's trying to remember something. You stretch, yawn, and notice a scatter of blue stones near your sleeping mat. You don't remember seeing them last night. They're not large, pebble-sized. Maybe the color of old denim soaked in starlight. You brush them gently with your fingers, they're cool. Cool in a way that doesn't match the desert's nighttime warmth. One has a faint crack running through it like it was frozen mid-word. You pocket a few, because of course you do. You continue walking as the light grows. The sky peels itself open slowly first, lilac, then gold, until you feel almost convinced the world isn't hiding something after all. Almost. The trail rises into a crooked plateau where erosion has carved the land into strange shapes. You pass stone columns, hollow arches, one narrow spire that looks suspiciously like a child with arms raised. And as you turn a corner, you find yourself at the edge of a shallow basin filled with scattered rocks. Blue. Hundreds of them. Some are clustered into vague shapes, spirals, naturally zigzags and circles with missing centers. Others seem casually tossed like breadcrumbs dropped in a hurry. In the middle of the basin stands a single stone slab, half buried. It's been smoothed deliberately, and on its surface, scratched in uneven lines, is the figure of a child. You know it's a child because the proportions are off. Head, too large, arms too thin. The figure holds something in one hand, maybe a star, maybe a flower, maybe a jagged tear in the sky. Depends how long you've been out here. Here's your historical anchor. Turquoise and other blue-green stones have always been highly valued among the desert peoples. For the Pueblo Zuni and Navajo turquoise represented water-sky protection. It was used in trade, in ceremony, and in burial. Some cultures believed it had a soul, or at least a memory. Now the myth somewhere in the high mesas, some say near Black Mesa. Others say farther north, a child was born with no shadow. The elders worried. Shadowless people were believed to belong partly to another world, either sky or stone, depending on which elder you asked. The child never cried, never spoke, but wherever they walked, small blue stones appeared, not falling, not dropping, just being, as if the ground had always had them, but needed permission to reveal them. At first, the village took it as a blessing. Crops grew, springs stayed full, birds lingered, but as the child grew, so did the stones. And soon they began appearing inside homes, in beds, in water jars, in the mouths of newborn animals. People panicked. Some wanted to drive the child out. Others wanted to build a temple. But before any decision was made, the child vanished mid-step, the story says, leaving behind only a pile of blue stones in their place, cold, silent, not sad, just finished. And after that, the wind stopped coming to that village, not angrily, just politely ceased to visit, like a friend who doesn't know how to show up after grief. Historians still argue whether this tale refers to an actual person, a symbolic migration story, or an explanation for a particularly rich vein of turquoise found in the region. Some believe the child represents a deity in disguise testing the people. Others say the blue stones were offerings to the wind itself, and when they were misused, the wind simply left. You kneel in the basin, running your hands through the blue stones. They're smooth but not uniform. Some are polished. Others are chipped raw, almost recently broken. You find one with a faint etching, a single line curved into a crescent, a moon, a bowl, an eye. You turn it over, just stone. But the impression lingers. At the far end of the basin, the stones thin out. You follow them like a trail of breadcrumbs, or breadcrumbs pretending to be a trail. Either way, they lead you to a crack in the rock, a slit no wider than your shoulders but tall enough to squeeze through. Inside, the light dims immediately. The air cools. You take 3 steps and stop. They're half hidden in shadow. A child-sized figure sits curled against the wall. You startle, but as you move closer, you see it's not a body. Not really. Just a pile of stones carefully arranged in the shape of a child. Smooth blue rocks for limbs, a rounded white one for the head, where the heart would be a hollow space. Empty. You feel the urge to place something inside it. One of the stones from your pocket. You resist. Instead, you bow your head slightly. A nod. A thank you. This is yours, not mine. Still no wind. But for a moment, the air inside the crack shifts. Not a breeze. Not quite. More like breath. A soft exhale from rock. Or memory. Or something childlike and ancient pretending to sleep. You back out of the crevice slowly, careful not to scatter any stones. Outside, the morning is full and gold, but the air remains still. You walk on. Behind you, the blue stones glint faintly in the rising light like pieces of a forgotten promise. Cave murals twist slightly when you blink, optical illusion, or a memory not meant for you. You walk until the light sharpens again, past, golden past, soft, until it begins to glare. The stillness of the morning has settled into its noon hush, where even the rocks seem reluctant to speak. You sip from your water skin and glance across the desert's rippled floor. A cluster of boulders up ahead catches your eye, low and jagged, sunburnt on one side, deeply shadowed on the other. As you approach, the shadows stretch towards you like an invitation. There's an opening at the base of one of the boulders, low, narrow, unassuming. It doesn't shout mystery, which is precisely what makes it interesting. You crouch and crawl inside the stone, pressing close to your back and shoulders until the corridor opens into a modest cave chamber. At first you don't see them. Then your eyes adjust. The walls are covered in murals, and not just the kind you've seen before. Faded spirals, handprints, simple stick figures with arms raised to the sun. These are detailed, layered. The pigments cling to the wall like wet thought. Ochre, charcoal, greens, smudges, brilliant reds that look too fresh. The figures are life-sized. Some face you, others twist away, and all of them seem to be moving. You blink. They don't move while you're looking directly. It's only when your eyes slide across the room, glancing, never locking, that something shifts. A limb bends, a jaw opens, a sun disk lowers by an imperceptible degree. Optical illusion? Probably, but the hair on your arms thinks otherwise. You stand still and breathe slowly. The room hums with stillness, not the same quiet as before. This is expectant, the kind of silence that holds a question. Here's your historical anchor. Many prehistoric cave sites across the southwest feature murals painted in layers, often one atop the other, spanning centuries. Each generation added new lines, new figures, new stories. The result wasn't a single narrative, but a conversation across time. Some of these overlapping images, when lit by flickering firelight, produce animated effects. Dancers seem to sway, snakes appear to slither, suns rotate. But what's painted here is more complex. You focus on a single panel. A group of figures surrounds a central spiral. Their limbs are elongated, their eyes oversized and expressionless. Above them floats a strange shape, part bird, part flame, part question mark. Around the edges, fine lines form concentric circles that pull the entire image inward. You blink. The spiral seems to deepen. You blink again. Now it seems to spin. You close your eyes, take a breath, open them. The mural is still, but your heartbeat is not. Now for your fringe side folklore. Some desert traditions speak of memory walls, caves, or structures painted with events so traumatic or sacred that they were meant not to be read, but relived. Not for you specifically, for the land. The story goes that if a cave was sealed correctly, the memories inside would stay asleep. If opened incorrectly, the memories might replay themselves, not as ghosts, not as visions, but as small, lived distortions, bends in time, warps in perception. Historians still argue whether these sites were ceremonial theatres, ritual confessionals, or teaching spaces, but one common thread remains: most of them were sealed off, on purpose, with stone, with silence. You walk slowly along the cave wall. One mural shows a group of people pointing skyward. The sky is red. One person has no head. Another holds what might be a ladder or maybe a beam of light. It's hard to say. What's strange is that the figures repeat almost like a flipbook across the next few feet of mural. Each panel shows them in a slightly different pose. In the final panel, they are gone. Just the red sky remains. You blink. The red deepens. You blink again. One of the figures is back. You close your eyes. This is fine. You move toward the rear of the cave. There, in a patch of shadow, is a smaller painting, a child or maybe a woman crouched beneath a tree. The tree is odd. Its branches extend downward. Roots, antlers, light. You touch the wall beside it. Not the mural, just the stone. It's cool, but it pulses faintly beneath your fingers like a heartbeat or a drumbeat heard from a long way off. A sound stirs, faint, not external. Somewhere in your inner ear, you back away. Outside the cave, the desert feels flattened by sunlight, blinding, the kind of light that doesn't warm, just reveals. You sit at the entrance, letting your vision adjust. Still no wind, but the stillness feels loaded now, like it's holding in breath or waiting for something to conclude. You glance back at the cave. Its mouth is small and dark, barely noticeable unless you're looking. You wonder how many others have walked past, unaware of the murmuring memory within. You remember the murals. Or at least you think you do. Already some of the details feel slippery, changing a little each time you try to recall them. You walk on. Behind you the cave says nothing. But your shadow, as you glance down, looks just a little bit, twisted, The wind carries a story of a thief who bottled starlight and broke the sky's agreement. The path ahead is dry and cracked each step, a soft crunch of old mud pretending to be stone. The air presses close now, not hot, but tight, like walking through a room that just heard a secret. You feel the faint tug of fatigue behind your eyes, the weight of too much watching. And still no wind. You cross a shallow plain where nothing taller than a shin-high scrub dares to grow. The landscape feels emptied out, as though someone vacuumed all motion from it long ago and forgot to refill it. Then you see something glinting in the distance. Not gold, not metal, something gentler, softer. You approach. A cluster of glass jars sits nestled in a shallow stone depression. There are maybe 7 or 8 each, the size of a clenched fist, sealed with aged leather or what's left of it. Some are half buried. One lies on its side empty. The others, they still hold something. You kneel and lift one carefully. Inside light. Not metaphorically, not a reflection. Actual pale bluish light. Soft. Faint. Like a fragment of moonrise trapped in honey. You tilt it slightly. The light moves. Okay, let's breathe. Here's your mainstream foothold in some southwestern traditions. Crystal containers and sealed vessels were used in rituals to represent the elements water, wind, even light. These objects were not just symbolic, they were believed to be functioning parts of the spiritual world, not reminders, tools, sometimes prisons. Now for the myth that sticks in your teeth like a sweet you didn't ask for. There was once a young weaver, clever, beautiful, admired, who decided she would not wait for the gods to answer her prayers for rain and wind. So she went up into the mountains during the dark of the moon and bottled starlight. She used glass her father had taught her to melt from sand, and she trapped the light with her own breath, sealing each jar with a whisper of her name. The stars did not like this. They complained to the sky. And the sky, being old and cranky, sent the wind to negotiate. But the weaver refused to give up her jars. She said they were hers, that the world needed stored light more than wind. The wind, insulted, tried to take them. And so she sealed the wind, too, in the final jar. Historians still argue whether this tale emerged as an explanation for windless periods, for droughts, or perhaps as a metaphor for greed wrapped in good intentions. Others say it's just a story about how light belongs to everyone, a lesson in hoarding versus sharing. But in the version told around embers and low voices, the jars were real. And if you find one, if you ever open one, you might free something that has been waiting, or forgive something that chose silence over vengeance. You examine the jar in your hand again. The leather seal is cracked. The light flickers slightly, like it's aware of being watched. You do not open it. Instead, you place it back where it was, gently, as if setting down a sleeping animal. You look around. The jars are arranged in a pattern, a loose arc, almost a crescent moon opening toward the east. A trail of tiny stones runs between them. Not random, not natural. This was arranged by someone with purpose. You find one jar fully broken, its contents are long gone, but a tiny curl of blackened grass has grown from beneath it, the only thing green you've seen in miles. You sit down in the dust, letting your mind wander. What if light has a memory? What if wind holds grudges? You recall a quote someone once shared about the universe not being made of atoms but of stories. You didn't understand it then. Now it feels like geology. You rise and begin to walk east, following the opening of the arc. The path becomes narrow-edged with shards of smoothed glass, pale and opalescent. One crunches under your boot, and you wince as if you've stepped on someone's name. Up ahead, the land flattens into a wide shelf of stone, where nothing grows and nothing breaks. You walk to its center. There, etched in the stone, is a single glyph, a spiral interrupted. You've seen spirals before. This one is different. This one ends halfway. It doesn't curl inward. It breaks off mid-motion, like someone began drawing time and then forgot how it worked. You stand, still listening. For a moment, the silence lifts, not with wind, but with weight. The air feels heavy, then lighter, as though something passed over you. Not air, not a bird, something more conceptual, a presence with wings. You don't look up, you don't need to. You walk back toward the jars, but slowly now. And when you pass them, you nod, not out of politeness, but apology. You do not know what was sealed. You're not entirely sure what wants to be released. But the jars are not yours. Still no wind. But something stirs in the back of your mind, a story that has not finished telling itself. Or maybe a jar still unopened. A row of vessels leaks water through their sealed morning, or a trick of desert air. You leave the starlight jars behind, heart oddly quiet. Not light, not heavy, just still like a bowl, set down carefully on stone. The path you now follow curves south, hugging a dry arroyo whose sides crumble slightly with every breath of your movement. And then sound, not much, just a faint drip, then another and another. Your ears long denied the voice of the windlatch onto the rhythm like a melody. You pick your way along the arroyo's edge until you spot them. A row of ceramic vessels lined up beneath a slight overhang in the rock, sheltered from the sun. About waist high, each one is beautifully made, hand-coiled, burnished and painted in soft earth tones. Some have cracked over time, others seem untouched. All are sealed, each one covered with a tight stone cap or a hardened paste of clay and ash. And yet water drips from their bases. You crouch beside the nearest one. The ceramic is cool, the seal intact, and yet a single clear drop of water is clinging to the underside, just about to fall. You wait, it falls, another forms, a steady, slow rhythm. You check the ground, damp, mud-dark, faintly green at the edges as if moss had once considered moving in. You examine the others, same thing. Every vessel is leaking just enough to create a slow, percussive song against the rock shelf. It's the only sound here. You sit beside them, listen, drip, drip, drip. Here's your historical handhold. Ceramic jars like these, often called olla, were used for storing water grain and even sacred ashes. Their construction was skilled, often involving layers of clay, tempered with sand, fired in pit kilns that reached temperatures modern researchers still struggle to replicate precisely. Some had ritual purposes, others were purely functional. But this isn't function, this is performance.
Now your whispered tale in the eastern mazes, there's a legend of a family who lost their son to a dust storm. He'd gone out to retrieve a lost feather. Not just any feather, but one from his father's ceremonial headdress. He never came back. His mother, unwilling to forget him, sealed her tears into 7 clay jars and buried them beneath the earth. But the ground rejected them. One by one they surfaced again, oozing moisture, even in the driest seasons. And ever since, they say, if you find a weeping jar and drink from its drops, you'll dream of what the desert is trying to remember. You don't drink. but you reach forward and touch one of the droplets just before it falls. Cool, real. No trick of condensation, it hasn't rained in weeks, no dew here. And the ceramic isn't porous enough to leak like this naturally, not at this rate, not with that much insistence. Historians still argue whether such jars were part of mourning rituals or weather prayers.
Some speculate that they were symbolic, deliberately bled with water to represent the grief of the land. Others say they were filled with water and then sealed during drought times, meant as offerings to the spirits of rain, sacrifices of drinkable life. But none explain how they could leak centuries later. One jar has a faint design painted around its belly, dark lines looping into an unfamiliar glyph. You recognize the spiral motif, but this one is interrupted with a dot in the middle. You run your finger over it and feel a slight indentation. A crater, maybe. You've seen this symbol before in passing, etched in rock, drawn on a woven sash, scratched into pottery. You never asked its meaning. It didn't feel like a question you had permission to ask. And now it feels like the answer is leaking out slowly, one drop at a time. You sit back and close your eyes, letting the rhythm of the dripping jars take over. Drip, drip, drip. You begin to imagine the people who placed these vessels here. Were they lined up during a funeral? A vigil? Was each one filled with memory, sealed with song? Did someone whisper to them as they closed them, "Keep this safe, keep this alive"? The dripping continues. You realize the vessels are placed in a curve, almost like a spine arcing slightly around the inner bend of the rock wall. Above them a series of faint carvings, feathers, droplets, a single sharp triangle, possibly a mountain or a blade. You don't know what the story is here, but you know it's being told. Not to you, to the land. You stand, dust yourself off. One final glance at the jars, one of them perhaps the youngest, glints strangely in the sunlight. For a moment it almost looks like the drop is falling upward. You blink. It falls normally. Probably. Still no wind. But the water falls like someone who still remembers how to cry. And the desert listens. You kneel where a sage claimed ants told him secrets about surviving time. You leave the weeping jars behind the rhythm of their sorrow, still tapping faintly behind your ears. The land ahead is different now, lower, flatter, cracked like old skin left too long in the sun. The path narrows and then dissolves entirely until you're simply walking between silences. Nothing grows here, not really. A few stubborn tufts of grass, a distant creosote, but mostly it's just sand, gravel and time. Then you see them, tiny flickering movements at your feet. Not wind, not pebbles, shifting ants. You kneel. It starts as a single thread, a procession moving with precision and intent. Their bodies shimmer slightly in the sun, tiny and black, each one carrying something, a sliver of leaf, a crumb, a pale bit of shell. You follow them with your gaze and discover their destination, a neat hole, no wider than a bead, surrounded by tiny white stones arranged in a tight circle. That's not natural. You lie flat chin, nearly in the dirt, watching. The ants seem organized, not just busy, deliberate. There's a rhythm to their movement that reminds you of something ancient, a kind of living glyph, shifting and reshaping. And suddenly you remember the story. There once was a man, nobody agrees on his name, who lived on the edge of the painted desert. Not a chief, not a priest, just a quiet man who walked with a crooked staff and watched the ants. He told anyone who'd listen, which wasn't many, that the ants were keeping a map. Not on paper, not in drawings, in movement. They walked the paths of old cities. They remembered the locations of wells. They danced around sacred ruins in slow spirals, marking places where the earth chose to forget. People mocked him, then ignored him, until one summer when water vanished, animals fled, and the wind stilled for days. He watched the ants, followed their line, and found a spring that hadn't flowed in years. He survived. Historians still argue whether this man was a clever survivalist, a desert mystic, or just lucky. There are no records, just a legend of the ant listener. A man who claimed the smallest things remembered what the grandest minds forgot. You rest your hand lightly on the ground near the hole. The soil is warm. The ants don't react to you. They continue their work. You whisper, not really expecting an answer. What do you remember? The answer, if there is one, comes not in words, but in movement. A new line of ants emerges, this time carrying not food, but tiny pieces of something pale and flat. You squint. Shell bone. Then you see it. The fragments form a pattern near the entrance, like a fan, like a glyph. You rise slowly, the shape, sticking in your mind a fan with 3 prongs radiating outward. You've seen this before, on pottery. Painted onto a kiva wall, it's associated with emergence.
A place where people were said to have come up from the underworld long before there were cities or prayers or sky. A sacred birthmark of the land. You glance around, there's no sign of human habitation, but the ants are still working as if someone gave them instructions long ago and they've simply refused to stop. Here's your historical grounding. In Hopi origin stories, Sipapu is the name given to the small hole or opening through which the first people emerged into this world. These stories often place the Sipapu inside Kiva's sacred underground chambers, but some versions say there are still real Sipapus hidden across the land, breathing slowly, waiting. The ants know something. Maybe they've always known. You look closer and realize the ants are also creating tiny shadows. Their bodies in this high sunlight leave slivers of black on the white stone ring. The effect is mesmerizing. The shadows form shifting marks like a language the earth writes with legs.
There's a saying among some desert clans, the wind teaches you to move, the ants teach you where to stop. You feel that now. You remain crouched a while longer, just watching, not interpreting, not collecting, just listening. You wonder if the sage of the ants ever came back, if he ever told others what he found, or if the desert, satisfied with his respect, simply let him disappear. It occurs to you that the ants don't pause, not even in this heat. They are neither rushed nor lazy, just focused. You envy them a little, still no wind, but the ants move in perfect stillness, as if they carry the wind inside them, tiny vessels of inherited motion. You stand. The glyph has changed again, not erased, just updated. You get the sense that if you stayed all day, it would keep evolving like a map that knows the future. You whisper again, softer this time, "Thank you," and walk on. Behind you, the ants rearrange the stones without ceremony, because remembering isn't dramatic. It's just ongoing. You chant softly, your voice echoes oddly, as though translated mid-air into something older. The sun lifts high now past the gentle morning stretch into its full desert authority. Shadows retreat under rocks like guilty secrets. The light becomes that particular kind of dry white that makes every color shiver a little, and your eyelids feel 2 sizes too small. You walk quietly. Not because you're tired, though, let's be honest, you are, but because the desert feels like it's listening again. And somehow you don't want to interrupt. The ground flattens into a sun-bleached terrace, scattered with black stones laid out in patterns too precise to be natural and too chaotic to be recent. A half circle here, a line that breaks then resumes. You don't know what it means, but your brain wants it to mean. You step onto the stones and pause, and then gently you speak. Just a few syllables, maybe your name, maybe not. Maybe a nonsense word you once mumbled in sleep. The sound barely leaves your throat. But the moment it does, it returns. Not an echo, not exactly, more like a translation. Your voice bounces back to you, warped ever so slightly. Higher, maybe, or lower. It repeats what you said, but with a different intention. It's unnerving, like hearing your own thoughts from behind a door. You test it again. I am here, you say aloud. The air returns not your words, but something like them, 3 soft syllables, almost musical. Not mocking, not hostile, just older. You stand still. Here's your historical grounding. There are locations throughout the Southwest where acoustic effects baffle even seasoned researchers. Some cliff alcoves reflect sound, selectively bouncing back certain frequencies while swallowing others. Some structures, like the chambers in Chaco Canyon, are believed to have been tuned for chant and ceremony, amplifying voices in deliberate ways. It's no accident. It's architecture in conversation with the wind. Now the strange part. Certain oral traditions speak of the breathing walls, caves, or canyons where language itself began to fracture, where the wind first heard human speech and tried to mimic it, but the wind, being wind, mispronounced. And those mispronunciations became new words, new dialects, new songs. It's said that every language on earth is just wind's attempt to remember what people once said. Historians still argue whether this is poetic nonsense or a beautifully preserved metaphor for linguistic drift, but standing here with your words being handed back to you slightly wrong, you wonder if maybe it's neither. Maybe it's truth the long way around. You walk forward slowly, chanting, now not anything specific, just tone, just vibration. The air plays along, sometimes the echo matches, sometimes it doesn't. And sometimes it returns too soon, like it had the answer before you asked the question. You find a low outcrop and sit on it, feeling the hum of your own voice resonate through the stone. It feels good, right? Like a cord plugged into the right socket. The sound travels into the ground and vanishes. But it leaves something behind. You hum one long note, eyes closed. The ground answers with a sound you didn't make. You snap your eyes open. Stillness, just stone, just heat. But now the silence feels inhabited, not full of ghosts or spirits, just echoes with opinions. You reach into your pack and pull out the blue stone from before, the one with the crescent mark. You place it on the ground in front of you. Then you hum again. The echo curves, shifts, leans toward the stone. You hum a different note. The echo straightens, cold and even. You stare at the stone like it just raised an eyebrow. Now the fringe tale among some elders. There's a belief that certain phrases are keys, not magical spells, more like resonant codes. Say the right sounds in the right place and the land opens to you. Not physically necessarily, but in knowledge, in permission. You try a phrase now, one you once heard from an old storyteller in Gallup Tocha Hani. Tocha Hani. You don't know what it means. You never asked. It felt rude to ask. The wind does not respond, but the stone in front of you rocks ever so slightly. You lean in, and then your own voice returns, not in real time, not quite. It repeats the phrase seconds after you say it, but it doesn't come from behind you or beside you. It rises from the stone itself. You step back. It falls silent again. You whisper something this time. Anything. A string of syllables with no known meaning. And the desert beneath your feet, beside your skin, inside your ears, repeats them back to you. Not like a machine. Like a memory. You sit again, quieter now. You say nothing, and the silence does not echo, it just holds you. Still no wind, but your words come back changed like travelers, returning home after centuries on the road, carrying souvenirs from languages you never learned. You find weather glyphs etched into cliff walls, rituals for commanding rain or warning it away. You continue eastward now, the weight of your own voice lingering behind you, like the scent of a blown-out candle. The path climbs again, slow, steady, the kind of uphill that isn't obvious until your calves complain. The terrain shifts into striated layers, thin bands of rose and charcoal pressed together like stacked cloth. Up ahead, a cliff face rises from the earth like a monolith trying to remember its purpose. And on it, carvings, hundreds. You stop in your tracks, not the usual petroglyphs you've come to expect. These are angular, not flowing, deeply cut, symbols upon symbols layered in a kind of frantic precision. Some are simple lines, others spiral or branch. But a few are unmistakable clouds, lightning and coiling as snakes, the visual shorthand for weather in nearly every desert culture. The entire wall is a storm story. You move closer. One glyph catches your eye, a triangle with a zigzag slicing through its center. Beneath it, a row of small circles. Above, a curved arc ending in a jagged slash. You don't know the language, but your bones say storm comes from the mountain. Rain feeds the steps, then breaks. You keep reading. It's not a mural, it's a calendar, a pattern, not in days but in weather behavior, ritual actions embedded into stone. Warnings, invitations. Here's your historical anchor. Many desert-dwelling peoples developed complex rain-making ceremonies, intricately timed and astronomically aligned. The Hopi-Zuni and others have long practiced elaborate dances and invocations tied to the Katsinam spirit beings believed to influence the weather. These weren't metaphorical rituals, they were contracts with the sky. Now for your poetic twist, one carving here shows a figure human-shaped but elongated with arms outstretched and small swirls etched into the hands. Around its feet, upward-pointing arrows like breath drawn backward. According to a rarely told tale, there were once those known as cloud prayers individuals who didn't dance or sing like the others. Instead, they spoke to the wind and sky in low, private tones, whispering weather glyphs drawn in the air with their fingers. They didn't command the rain. They negotiated. It was said the sky listened until one day the glyphs stopped working, and so did the rain. You trace one of the lines with your fingertip. It curves smoothly before breaking at an odd angle, an intentional fracture, a warning glyph maybe, or one of mourning. Your shadow moves across the wall as the sun tilts above, and you see a new detail. Several glyphs are scarred, scratched over, not by time but by hands. Someone tried to erase part of the story. Why historians still argue whether weather glyphs were purely religious symbols or early meteorological systems. Some believe they tracked wind currents, others say they were scripts, only shamans could read glyphs for summoning or banishing forces no ordinary person should speak to. You step back to view the whole wall, and that's when you notice the center. Unlike the rest, this symbol is vast, nearly as tall as you, and carved with such precision it glows slightly in the light. It's a spiral, yes, but one shaped like a cyclone. It spins inward, not outward, around its edges, radiating lines like the rays of a sun. It's hypnotic. You stare at it too long. Your mouth goes dry. A memory not your own nudges your thoughts, a flash of lightning over the mesa, the scent of wet stone, the rising chant of dozens of voices under a sky cracking open like an egg. And then nothing. You blink, you're back. But something's changed. You hear a sound, not the wind, not yet. A rumble faint and distant. You look skyward. The horizon remains cloudless. You move along the cliff's base, passing more symbols, each one stranger. Some are reversed mirror glyphs, others are stacked vertically like a ladder. And then you see the oddest one yet, a blank space, clean stone, unmarked, smoothed intentionally, framed by glyphs on all sides but left pristine. Almost like a missing tooth in a perfect grin. You reach out, touch it, cool, then warm. You snatch your hand back. Still no wind, but the stone pulses softly just once, like a heartbeat in reverse. And you understand something was taken from here. Not a symbol, a permission. Somewhere between the cloud prayers and the storm stories, someone asked the sky for too much, or too little, or at the wrong time. And the wind, it hasn't forgiven the error. You step away, leaving the glyphs undisturbed. Their meanings aren't for you, not fully, but their presence feels recent. Not in age, but in intention, as though the carvings are still being read, or worse, still waiting for a reply. You continue walking. A hot stillness blankets the land, but it feels thinner now, like something is pacing just outside your field of hearing. Still no wind. But above you, a single cloud has appeared, and it is not moving. You reach a battlefield where no bones were found did they fight or agree to forget. You descend from the glyph-covered cliff face feet, crunching through loose shale that slides with every step, like the desert itself is gently discouraging your progress. Not rudely, just enough to make you question your direction, but you keep going. The land levels out into a wide, flat basin, ringed with low, worn hills. No trees, no stone outcrops, just dust, scattered boulders, and a silence so deep it feels like you're wearing it. You pause. There's nothing special here at first glance, no ruins, no murals, no ceremonial glyphs, just a long, empty space where the wind should be. And then you notice the ground, not the surface, but the subtle patterns beneath it. The desert crust is faintly bruised in places, sunken slightly in lines. Arcs, shapes that repeat. You crouch, footprints, not exactly, more like shadows of movement, trails that press just enough to suggest people once moved here, many people all at once in rhythm. You stand slowly, eyes scanning the edges of the basin. It doesn't feel like a gathering place. It feels like a boundary, a line, a decision point. You walk deeper into the center, and your boots begin to strike odd objects, small ridges, stone piles. You uncover 3 flat rocks stacked deliberately. Beneath them a bundle of dried grass, carefully tied. No bones, no cloth, just the gesture. You find another, then another, and suddenly you understand. This was a battlefield, or something that tried very hard to look like one. Here's your historical foothold. There were skirmishes among desert peoples, especially during times of drought or famine. Territory water and sacred sites were all contested. But many cultures also placed immense value on ritual conflict, symbolic warfare conducted with strict rules, often with minimal bloodshed, to settle disputes without unraveling communities. And here the fringe tale, some desert villages, it is said, settled their deepest conflicts not with weapons but with removal. Each side brought symbols instead of soldiers, baskets instead of blades. They arranged objects on the earth in patterns representing their side of the story, truths, grievances, promises. Then both groups left, never returning. The desert would judge. This place feels like one of those. There are no weapons, no arrowheads, no burned-out camps. But the land bears the tension of a conversation that ended abruptly. You find more bundles, feathers tied with sinew, a broken flute reed, tiny pebbles arranged in the shape of a crescent moon. Grave goods, not trophies, declarations. You kneel beside a smooth, flat stone with etchings so faint they're almost erased. You brush sand away, slowly revealing a motif. 2 hands, side by side, not touching. Between them, a spiral. Always the spiral. But this one doesn't turn inward or outward. It's broken at the center, cut clean through. You run your fingers along the groove. The stone is unusually cold. Historians still argue whether this region saw a single major conflict or a series of silent migrations, tribes passing through like ghosts, refusing to be remembered too clearly. Some researchers claim there was a great forgetting, a mutually agreed collapsal memory, that people here chose to leave without telling the next generation why. You stand again, and the space feels larger now, as if the silence has stepped back to give you room. No birds, no insects, even your own breath seems quieter. You walk to the very center of the basin and find a ring of white stones unbroken. Inside it, nothing, no artifacts, no markings, just dust. And a single indentation, shallow, round about the size of a bowl, pressed lightly into the earth. A place where something once was, or something was meant to arrive. You sit beside it, trying to imagine the people who stood here. Did they shout chant? Or did they stand like you, quiet, watching each other, daring someone to speak first? There's a tale told only by desert walkers, the kind of people who forget what day it is, but remember which cactus flowers open after rain. The story goes like this: 2 villages prepared for war. But before the first spear flew, an elder walked between them. She carried no weapon, only a bowl of wind, not a metaphor, a literal sealed bowl gathered from the last great gust that passed through the mesa 3 days prior. She set it down in the dust and said, "Whoever speaks first, this will belong to them." Neither side spoke for days. When the elder returned, the bowl was empty, and no one had died. But the wind was never seen in that valley again. Still no wind. You leave the basin quietly, careful not to step on any of the patterns. It feels like the kind of place that still remembers names, and you are not ready to give yours away. You uncover small figures carved of dark glass and salt symbols of grief or defense. The trail narrows again. The trail might be generous. It's more a suggestion of passage. Rocks, slightly less aggressive, ground slightly more worn. The kind of path made not by feet but by reluctance, as if even the desert hesitated before walking here. You follow it anyway. It leads into a shallow ravine, walls rising slowly, then sharply closing you in like a mouth preparing to speak. The light dims, not from the sky, but from the quality of the stone. Here the sandstone gives way to a darker, denser rock that drinks sunlight instead of reflecting it. And then you see them. Scattered across the base of the ravine, half buried in dust and shadow, are figures. Tiny, carved. You kneel beside one. It's no taller than your thumb. Humanoid, yes, but barely. Limbs thick, head oversized features worn smooth by time or intent. It's made of obsidian, gleaming black light, sliding over it like oil. You pick it up. It's heavier than it should be. Then you see another just behind it. This one is translucent. Salt. Not polished, just roughly hewn. Crystalline, crumbling slightly at the edges. You brush dust from its base and find an indentation shaped like a teardrop, of course. You begin to see more dozens scattered through the ravine, some half-buried, some standing upright in small alcoves, carved into the stone. They're arranged without symmetry, without pattern. But it doesn't feel random, it feels like placement with emotion, not for display, for offering, for memory or warning. You line a few of them up beside each other, black, white, obsidian, salt, grief and preservation, shadow and memory. Here's your historical touchstone in some Southwest traditions. Figurines were used as guardians placed at the entrances to sacred sites, or buried with the dead. Some were used in fertility rituals, others as stand-ins for spirits too dangerous to name aloud. Most were made of stone, clay, or wood. But these materials, volcanic glass and crystallized salt, are rarer. They're not just symbolic, they're volatile. Obsidian cuts with ease, sharper than steel. Salt dissolves with a single tear. Two materials in tension. Now for the whisper tale, there's an old story of a village that mourned too long. After losing nearly everything in a great fire, family fields, the memory of music, they began to carve their grief into shapes. But they didn't use clay, they used the tears left behind and the stones melted by heat, salt, obsidian. They carved their sorrow into little people, gave them names, and left them in the ravine between the dead lands and the living ones. It was a ritual of balance. Don't carry your grief forward, leave it where it belongs. But the ravine grew heavy with them. Too heavy. One morning the wind passed through and turned around, refused to enter, not from fear, out of respect. Historians still debate the function of sites like this: shrines, burial fields, psychological therapy stations centuries before the phrase existed. Some say the figures were meant to guard the sorrow so it wouldn't follow travelers. Others say they were pieces of people lost too early, sculpted from memory so they could continue watching the world. You hold one of the salt figures gently. It flakes slightly in your hand. You set it down, quickly, carefully, in the exact position it was in before. One of the alcoves, higher in the rock, holds something different. You climb up to it, fingers gripping crevices, breath shallow in the heat. Inside, a larger figure, almost the size of a melon. This one is half obsidian, half salt, joined seamlessly in the middle. The left side glints like shadow, the right shimmers like frost. Its features are smoother, less human. Its eyes are closed. You reach toward it, then stop. Because for a moment, just a blink, it looks like it's breathing. You back away, not in fear, in deference. Still no wind. But the silence here isn't emptiness, it's saturation. The air is full of unshed tears and stories no one had time to finish. You descend the ravine carefully. You do not pocket any of the figures. You do not count them. You do not rearrange. Some grief isn't yours to catalogue. You exit the mouth of the ravine and turn back once, just once. A breeze picks up at your back, brief, almost shy. It touches your shoulder like a finger, then vanishes. You don't smile, but you feel acknowledged.
And for now, that's enough. A ceremonial pit once aligned with stars until something fell in that should not have. The landscape stretches open again, rinsed clean of grief, but not memory. You walk across a flat shelf of stone that feels unusually, even like it was flattened on purpose. There are no trees, no ruins, no markings, just windless light and the distant sound of your own footsteps refusing to echo. Then you notice a shallow dip in the ground ahead. Not large, not deep, but too round, too precise. You approach. At the center of the shelf lies a circular pit, 6 feet across, perfectly smooth around the edges, as though the desert had blinked and dropped a coin. It's not a hole for water or cooking or shelter. It's too deliberate. You step to the rim and look down. The inside is black, not the color, the feeling. Black like a place that once had light and chose to forget it. Black like a thought no one's allowed to say out loud anymore. You toss in a pebble. No sound, no bounce, just gone. You take a cautious step back. Here's your historical foothold in ancient observatories throughout the southwest, like those at Chaco Canyon, Casa Rinconada, and elsewhere. Ceremonial pits were often aligned with the stars, used for solstice markers, sky-watching rituals, and storytelling under constellations. These weren't primitive guesses, they were stone telescopes. Some were linked with kivas, others with dance circles, all suggesting a relationship between the people and the sky, not as observers, but participants. Now for the shadow legend. There was once a gathering place called Atziahu, the mouth of the sky. It was said to be aligned with the 7 wandering stars and the breath of the wind. Ceremonies were held there to mark the turning of seasons, the silence between eclipses, and the passing of souls from dust to breath. But one night, according to the story, something fell. No one knows what. A star, maybe. A voice? A broken promise. Something not meant for this world. It landed in the pit during the height of the winter ceremony. After that, the stars refused to line up again. The people left. The pit remained. Historians still argue whether stories like these point to meteorite strikes, collapsed ceremonial tunnels, or social collapse dramatized through celestial metaphor. Some even speculate about ancient attempts at star mapping gone wrong, like a sky code, overwritten too many times until the meaning fractured. You kneel beside the pit and place your hand on the rim. Cold, not cold. You tap the edge. The stone rings softly like a cracked bell. You glance upward. The sun hovers just off center. No clouds, but something about the light feels off. The shadows don't point where they should. You notice yours is bent just slightly, like a compass, trying not to be obvious about its confusion.
You lie flat eyes level with the pit's rim, and suddenly you see it. A series of small carved notches around the circle's inner edge. Alignments, star positions, but they're not aligned with anything anymore. Every mark is half a degree off, every pattern skewed, as if the sky shifted, or the pit did, or maybe the thing that fell into it changed the ground itself. You back away from the rim, slowly, careful not to breathe too hard. The air around the pit feels thinner, not dangerous, just absent, like whatever lives here doesn't need air or doesn't like sharing. And then for a heartbeat you hear a sound, not wind, not stone, a tone, high, quick and metallic, like a chime being rung beneath a blanket. Then silence. You glance around. Nothing moves. Not a leaf, not a bird, not a breath of cloud. The silence here is full of waiting. You walk in a wide circle around the pit, giving it distance you can't quite justify. As you do, you find small stones placed carefully, evenly spaced, almost like counters in a forgotten game. 12 in total. You pick one up. It's etched, a spiral as always, but this one is jagged in the middle as if someone tried to interrupt it with a knife. A broken spiral, a warning, or a diagram. You set it back down, still no wind, but the pit seems to lean towards you slightly, like a mouth that wants to ask a question but can't remember the first word. You leave the shelf in silence. Behind you, the ceremonial pit remains, not empty, just full of something too still to notice. Not a howl, not a track. Did someone silence them, or did they choose to leave? You descend the slope from the pit footsteps, muffled by sand that seems too fine to hold history. The land is quiet again, which no longer surprises you. But it's a different quiet now, thinner, sharper, as if it's been shaved of sound. You begin to notice something missing. Not the wind, not voices.
Coyotes. It takes a moment to register. You've wandered through miles of wild scrub and endless dusk. You've slept under stars, climbed through canyons, stepped over ancient ash. And not once have you heard the signature trill wail or yip of a desert coyote. Not a shadow, not a paw print. You pause on the ridge, scanning the horizon. This should be their kingdom. Here's your historical foothold. Coyotes, tricksters, and teachers are central figures in indigenous mythology across the Southwest. In Hopi Navajo and Zuni stories, they are boundary creatures, messengers between worlds, breakers of taboo, catalysts of unintended wisdom, and of course, opportunists. They have thrived in nearly every environment from forest to freeway. But here, nothing. You descend into a shallow valley ringed with low basalt outcroppings. It looks like a place a coyote would love. Shade vantage points mice under every rock. But even the air feels disinterested.
You kneel near a dried creek bed and examine the dust for prints. Bird, lizard, even a beetle, bless it. But no canine. Then you find it. A smooth stone placed carefully atop a larger one. The shape is odd, elongated, almost like a snout. Etched into its surface, 3 parallel scratches, not deep but deliberate. You know this symbol. In some desert dialects, it's the mark for absence. Not loss, not warning, just something that is not where it should be. There's a story the elders rarely tell children. It's too quiet to be a bedtime tale. It's the story of the last coyote cry, a night when the coyotes all stopped howling at once. No one knew why, no sickness, no famine. They simply stopped, and then they began to walk. Single file, one by one, toward the edge of the painted desert. They say they left because someone asked them to. Not with words, with a silence so loud it offended even the tricksters. And rather than defy it, they obeyed. The next morning, the wind followed them. Historians still argue whether predator silence in this region is tied to migration patterns, climate change, or human interference. But in certain oral traditions, it's explained more directly. The coyotes were custodians of the desert stories. When people stopped listening, the coyotes stopped speaking, and they took their stories with them. You sit on a ledge, staring out across the dry wash. The sun is beginning to fall behind the rocks. You listen. Not even a rustle. Your ears ache from the absence. You reach into your pouch and pull out one of the blue stones from earlier, the ones that shimmer faintly under pressure. You press it to your lips. Say nothing, just offer the silence back. Still no answer, but then something happens. A single rock falls behind you. You turn, nothing. But something has changed in the air, a scent, faint, wild, musky, animal. You don't smile, you don't speak, but you wait.
A full minute passes, then distant. So distant you think you imagined it a single bark. Not a howl, not a chorus, just one, then gone. You sit longer, unsure whether it was memory or mercy. Then you rise. As you descend the far side of the valley, you notice something carved into the cliff face, just a few inches high. Faint, but unmistakable, a spiral as always. But this one has legs, 4 of them. Inside a canyon crack, the acoustics mimic. Your voice, was it built this way or alive? The sun has finally begun its long fall behind the mesas, dragging light with it in streaks of burnt orange and soft gold. Shadows gather like gossip, never rushing, just quietly filling the corners. You follow a narrowing trail into what looks like a fault in the earth, a thin crack between cliffs barely wide enough to pass through sideways. But pass through you do, because something in the air insists that you should. It's cooler inside. Narrow, dark, the walls rising sharply on either side like folded wings. The path barely allows you to breathe deeply, and even your backpack brushes stone. For once, your own footsteps feel too loud. The crunch of sand under your boots ricochets unnaturally, like each sound is trying to escape and can't find a way out. Then you clear the first bend and the canyon opens just enough to let the sky peek in a sliver of dusky blue. You pause and speak. Just a word, hello, or maybe your name again. It comes back to you, but not as it left. This echo is wrong, not distorted, not delayed. Responsive. You say your name and what returns sounds like your name said by someone else. Not a different pitch, a different mouth, less certain, slightly amused, like your voice came back with an opinion. You try again. This time you say, I am alone. The canyon replies alone, not mimicking, reflecting, interpreting. You feel a shiver.
Here's your historical fact. Certain formations in the southwest, including sacred canyons like Canyon de Chelly, are known to produce anomalous echoes. Indigenous peoples used them during ceremony storytelling and solitary prayer. The belief wasn't just that the land heard, but that it answered. Now for your liminal tale. They say there is a place in the desert, a thin canyon, with walls close enough to press back breath, that was once used to teach children how to speak with spirits. Not see them, not summon them. Speak! The child would walk alone through the narrow path, whispering names of ancestors, animals, wind. The canyon would repeat only what needed to be heard. It was a test, a ritual. And occasionally, when the canyon liked the child, it would repeat something the child hadn't said yet. A message, a memory, a voice borrowed from the future. Historians still argue whether these canyons were selected for their natural acoustics or whether the acoustics were shaped intentionally. Some believe sandstone itself may store and reflect certain frequencies in ways we still don't fully understand. You sit against one cool wall and hum softly. The sound dances along the corridor and returns in waves. The rhythm feels personal, like your own heartbeat echoed back to you by someone who's been practicing. You begin to speak again, not full sentences, not prayers, just words. Remember, stone, wind, return. The canyon replies. Sometimes a perfect echo, sometimes a reinterpretation. Sometimes it says nothing, which feels like a refusal or a boundary. You glance along the walls and notice something subtle. The stone isn't smooth, it's scored. Thousands of thin, short lines etched at strange intervals like tick marks kept by someone not quite sane. Some of the marks are clustered tightly, others spread apart. A pattern. You trace them with your finger. They feel like vibrations carved in slow motion. You stand and whisper into one wall cheek close to the stone. This time the reply comes not as sound, but as pressure, a soft push against your chest. Not external, internal. Like your lungs briefly remembered being younger. You back away slowly, still no wind. But the air in here is not dead, it is dense with audition. Not ears, not presence. Just the act of listening so long it started to change form. You exit the canyon crack as the sun finally drops. Behind you, your last words drift back to you a full 10 seconds late. Out of order, you are come still here. Not creepy, not exactly. Just a voice with poor timing and perfect attention. You do not reply. You let it have the last word. You sift through burnt offerings that sprouted tiny quills, nature magic, or hallucination night gathers. Not all at once, but in slow layers like shawls draped over a sleeping elder. The desert cools with that sudden surgical clarity it saves for those who dared call it lifeless. You walk with your jacket drawn close, boots brushing sand that no longer reflects heat but stores memory. The moon isn't up yet, but the stars have arrived early. You stumble onto a small clearing sheltered by a collapsed arch of stone. The air here feels altered, charged, though you see no fire, no wind, just a stillness that vibrates. At the center of the clearing lies a shallow, blackened pit. Your instincts whisper fire. You crouch beside it. Yes, burnt earth, charcoal, ash fused into loose glass beads. But there's more. Sprinkled around the edges and even rising faintly from the middle of the pit are tiny filaments. You look closer. Quills, not feathers, not hair. Something stranger. Each one is no longer than a fingernail, pale and translucent. Some curved like question marks, others pinned straight. They don't look animal, they don't look artificial. They look like a mistake made by light. You reach down and pick one up. It crumbles softly between your fingers, disappearing into nothing. You blink. It was there, and now it's not. You scan the edges of the pit and begin to notice more scraps of woven fiber, singed and coiled like snakes mid-dream. A ring of stones etched with flame symbols, not carved but melted in, as though heat remembered a language. Here's your historical anchor across the pre-Columbian Southwest fire ceremonies were central to many communities, not just for warmth or cooking, but for transformation. Wood and grain weren't just burned, they were sent. Prayers were added like kindling. Offerings included feathers, pigment, even written glyphs on bark or hide. Now, for your glimmering fringe tale, there's a story about a fire that burned without fuel. The tale goes a group of women gathered on the longest night of the year, bringing no wood, no spark, no torch. They sat in a circle and sang, just sang. Songs they'd been taught and songs they hadn't learned yet. And the earth ignited. The flames didn't consume. They revealed. In the ashes, after the singing stopped, were found tiny needle-like feathers, said to be the quills of words, too powerful to speak. Historians still argue whether this refers to a ritualized, hallucinatory experience, smoke-induced visions from burning datura, or other desert plants, or whether it was a metaphor for the moment stories became visible. You examine the burn pit more closely and find a handprint pressed into the scorched earth, not deep, just a gesture, a palm flattened into memory. Beside it, a ring of dried pigment, rust red, dusted like powder across blackened stone. It hasn't faded, in fact it glows faintly under starlight. You speak aloud without thinking. Was this yours? The silence replies with a single sound, crack, stone settling. Maybe. But it's enough. You do not move closer. You back away respectfully and sit just beyond the ring. Above you the stars pulse. And now something strange. The longer you sit, the more quills you see. Dozens, then hundreds, sprouting gently from the ashes. Delicate, pale, impossible. You rub your eyes. Still there. You reach out again, gently. The moment your fingers pass the threshold of the fire circle, the air hums. A low vibration, not in your ears, but in your teeth. You freeze, then retreat. The hum stops. You try again. One step in, the vibration resumes. It's not pain, it's recognition. Like standing too close to a speaker you can't quite hear, but absolutely feel. You step back. It's clear now the fire pit is alive with residue, not flame, not heat. Meaning, somewhere between grief and electricity. Still no wind, but one of the quills near the edge twists slightly, as if caught in a breeze that isn't there. You rise and bow your head. The night breathes. You leave the circle intact, stepping lightly around the perimeter, and walk away without turning back. The desert, after all, does not tolerate lingering in places that remember too well. A twisted tree hums faintly at dusk, signal survivor or boundary post. The path bends toward a low ridge, quiet as breath held before a decision. You crest it slowly, the sky now indigo washed with silver stars in full attendance. There is no moon yet, just anticipation of one. Then, in silhouette, you see it. A tree. But not the kind that thrives, not even the kind that clings. This one is twisted trunk, bent sideways branches like fingers, too long without rest. It's perched on a low shelf of rock, completely alone. You descend toward it wary at first, then curious. The closer you get, the more wrong it feels. Not wrong like danger, wrong like a rule has been ignored. This tree shouldn't be here. Nothing else grows on this patch of land. No scrub, no grass, not even stubborn lichen, just bare stone. Yet the tree stands alive, barely. Leaves like ash, bark mottled with pale streaks, limbs frozen in a kind of permanent shiver. You circle it slowly, and then you hear it, a hum, faint, infrequent, somewhere between vibration and sigh. You lean in. The tree is making the sound. Not with movement, there's no breeze to shift its limbs. The sound is coming from within. You press a hand to the bark. Warm. Not hot, not cold. Warm like skin that recently held a fever. You hold your breath. The hum comes again. Not constant, pulsed, like a signal with no recipient. You remember a story. There was once a tree in the painted desert known as the reverser. It grew sideways in defiance of sun and soil. Elders claimed it wasn't planted, it arrived carried in seed form inside the stomach of a wind that no longer exists. The reverser didn't bloom, it didn't bear fruit, but every dusk it hummed. People believed it marked the edge between two agreements, what the land agreed to give and what it refused to forget. Crossing that threshold was allowed, but not without consequence. They say one man camped beneath it for 7 nights and stopped dreaming entirely. Historians still argue whether the story reflects a psychological boundary, a cultural taboo, or perhaps just an observation about desert acoustics playing tricks on overheated minds. But you're here, and the hum is real. You walk slowly around the tree. At its base are rocks arranged in a spiral again, but this spiral breaks halfway through, interrupted by a small pile of bones. Not animal, not human. Something in between. They're delicate, pale, arranged with reverence or panic, you can't tell which. You crouch beside them and find a glyph scratched into the stone beneath two parallel lines with a third cutting across them diagonally. A sigil of severance. The hum deepens. You rise and touch a branch. It doesn't resist, but it also doesn't sway. It feels less like wood and more like memory hardened into form. You say softly, "Why are you still here?" The hum stops. A pause. Then 3 short pulses, like breath but not quite. You remove your hand. The tree returns to silence. You take a few steps back and notice something else. Your footsteps sound dull around the tree, like walking inside a dream you've forgotten twice. You snap your fingers. No echo. You whisper. The sound doesn't return. Still no wind, but the tree, it seems to be waiting for what you don't know. A listener, a second tree, a word lost centuries ago. Whatever it is, you don't have it. But you've heard the hum now, and you're not sure you'll ever fully forget it. You walk away without turning around. Some things, after all, don't need a goodbye. They already know you were there. You stumble upon a dry riverbed that once ran backward, witness to an event no one explains. The air shifts subtly as you leave the tree behind. No breeze, no temperature change, but a quiet recalibration. As if something unseen has tallied your presence and passed the ledger along. You descend into a gentle slope, the rock softening into fine-grained dust that clings to your boots like a hesitant child. The stars are crisp now, the sky so clean it could cut paper. And then, as your steps grow quieter, you feel a tug in your chest. Not emotional, directional. You look up. Before you lies a riverbed, dry of course, cracked and parched its former flow, marked only by the smoothness of its curves and the paleness of its stones. But it's large, wider than any other you've seen on this walk, wide enough to once carry something serious. You drop down into it and the change is immediate. The air is different, cooler, but also tighter, like a room where something important had just been said, and no one wants to be the first to breathe afterward. You walk along the channel, running your hand across the high sediment walls. You find old flood lines, sediment smears like ghostly tattoos, some nearly 15 feet above your head. This river was never timid. Here's your historical fact: rivers throughout the American Southwest, including the Little Colorado and San Juan, once surged violently after monsoon rains or spring melt. Ancient communities built entire calendars around the timing of these flows. Their lives weren't shaped by rivers, they negotiated with them. Now for the oddity. You follow the bed for nearly a mile. Then just past a curve you notice something wrong. The orientation of the debris, twigs, driftwood, erosion patterns, all wrong. Everything here suggests a flow against gravity, not down the slope, but up. You crouch and examine the sediment closer, the way stones are smoothed, the way roots are exposed. You pick up a small branch. Its tapering shows it once resisted a flow coming from the bottom of the channel. The river reversed. You stand still. There's an old tale, rarely shared, often dismissed, about the return current. It tells of a single night many generations ago when the sky over the desert cracked open without storm and the rivers turned backward, flowing from dryland to mountain. No one drowned, but everyone forgot something. When the flow resumed its rightful course, it carried not water, but whispers. Fragments of speech floating atop the current, repeating things no one remembered saying. Historians still argue whether this is a poetic rendering of a rare flash flood, or perhaps a metaphor for collective cultural loss. Others suspect it's a memory of a seismic event. Earth shifted, water rebelled. You walk a little further and find a tree stump, gnarled and white, half buried in the riverbed. Its roots point uphill. You dig gently at its base, uncovering what looks like a fossilized feather caught in the roots and hardened by mineral and heat. You hold it in your hand. It's light but unbreakable. Then in the distance you hear a sound. Soft, a gurgle, no, a breath. The riverbed exhales. Once, just once, and then silence. You do not move. The sound does not repeat, but now a strange awareness settles over you. Everything here has already happened, and not in the usual dusty sense, in a looped sense. The reversed flow, the unspoken messages, the absent coyotes, it all echoes back here. You reach into your pouch and place a small pebble onto the riverbed. No ceremony, just presence. The air around your hand tightens like you've closed a drawer that wasn't empty. Still no wind. But as you leave the riverbed, climbing the far slope back into higher land, your ears pop. Slightly, as though you've left behind a pressure system that remembers too much. You glance back just once. The feather lies where you left it, and if the river ever flows again, it will carry that piece of the sky backward. One last time. You find broken tools fused with bone sacrifice accident or something unfinished. The path beyond the riverbed slopes upward again, gently at first, then with a stubborn sort of tilt, as if the land is trying to make you earn the next answer. The stars lean in closer now, unblinking. The desert at night feels not like it's sleeping, but pretending to sleep. You crest a low rise and stumble into a clearing you weren't expecting. It's not large, but it's busy. Scattered across the ground are broken fragments, stone blades, pottery shards, bent copper awls, fire-scorched wood. At first glance it looks like a midden trash heap, but you crouch beside a split obsidian knife and the truth settles in. This is not garbage. It's interrupted work. The tools are not discarded, they're mid-task. A chisel stuck in a cracked stone, a weaving needle still threaded. A bowl not smashed but never finished its rim, unpolished and lopsided, like the potter, stood up mid-spin and never came back. You reach toward a pile of thin splinters, assuming they're cactus wood, until you realize they're bones. Small, delicate, human. Children maybe, or old. You're not sure what's worse. The bones are fused to the tools, not by burial, not by time, by heat. Stone melded to rib. Copper fused to finger. It's grotesque and gentle at the same time, like a memory that refuses to decay properly. Here's your historical anchor across the southwest. There are known sites where tools and bones mingle. Some are ritual deposits, offerings made at moments of cultural transition. Others are evidence of hasty evacuations or devastating fire, but this doesn't look chaotic, it looks deliberate. Now for the darker tale. There's a legend told only during eclipses about a village where the wind once offered a bargain.
"Leave your tools," it said, "and I will carry your names forward." But the people refused. They had worked too long. They had too much left to do. So the wind took their bodies instead and fused them to their labor so that the unfinished work would never be truly abandoned. Historians still argue whether such stories are metaphor or warning, whether these fusions are symbols of devotion or of being devoured by devotion. You find a bone comb, its teeth still strung with human hair. A scraper sharpened down to a sliver embedded in the knuckle of a calcified hand. And in the center of the site, a flat stone table blackened on one side, polished on the other. On it, a single spiral drawn not with ink or pigment, but scratched into the surface by repeated motion. Hundreds of circles overlapping, imperfect, obsessive. You sit beside the stone. A breeze stirs, just once, brief, cool, and then gone. You look around quickly, unsure if something has changed.
The stars still shine, the clearing remains, but now you feel it, the presence of refusal. Someone said no here, no to leaving, no to surrendering the task, no to time, still no wind. But in the air, something softer now, not regret, not even sorrow, insistence. You walk among the fragments, careful not to step too close. This place doesn't want to be mourned. It doesn't even want to be understood. It wants to be acknowledged. You take a flat shard of pottery, run your thumb across its glazed edge, and place it gently on the stone table beside the spiral. The air sighs, not in sound but in release, as if a small pressure has been lifted. A name ticked off a list you leave without speaking. This is not a place for stories. It is a place where stories became work, and work became witness. And the wind, when it returns, will decide which is which. A perfectly round hole in stone leads nowhere, portal prank or punctuation. You leave the clearing with the fused tools behind, stepping into terrain that feels neutral, not indifferent, just untouched. Like the land has exhaled from something it didn't entirely survive. The stars wheel overhead in their quiet rhythm, but the path seems to forget it has a destination. You wander over patches of gravel, smooth rock, and ankle-deep dust. Nothing calls to you. And then something doesn't. It doesn't shout. It doesn't whisper. It just is. Up ahead, nestled against a small rise of weathered sandstone, sits a hole. A perfect circle carved directly into the rock. Not large, about the diameter of a grown person's shoulders, waist-high. Smooth-edged, flawless, almost clinical. You stop. Blink. It looks man-made, but not by hand. There are no tool marks, no chisel scars, no rough patches to betray its creation. It's too clean, too intentional. You circle it. The hole goes back maybe 4 feet. Then it ends. No tunnel, no passage, just a shallow, perfectly smooth interior. A round cave that leads nowhere. You reach in. The air inside is cool. Still, it smells faintly of wet stone, though nothing about this land suggests recent water. You run your hand along the inner surface. It's not just smooth, it's polished. Like generations of fingers have passed here. Or perhaps none at all. Here's your historical foothold across the southwest. Mysterious carved holes appear in various sites, Mogollon, ancestral Puebloan, and Fremont regions among them. Some are believed to be astronomical sightlines, others ceremonial markers. Some were likely used for offerings or as sipapus, small holes, symbolizing the portal from the underworld to the world of the living. But this doesn't behave. No markings, no surrounding shrine, no symbols, just a dot, a period in stone. There's a fringe tale rarely spoken because it's more of a riddle than a story. It goes like this. Once the wind carved a perfect circle into stone, not to look through, not to reach through, just so it would know when to stop. You stand beside the hole, trying to imagine why it exists. An unfinished passage, a joke, a pause. You speak toward it. Hello. The word enters, doesn't return. No echo, no sound. Just swallowed. You try again. Nothing. You place your hand inside again and feel nothing unusual. But when you pull it out, your skin tingles, just faintly, as if the air in the hole is slightly charged. You pick up a pebble, drop it in. It clinks once, then silence. You consider climbing in, but your knees and your better judgment vote no, still no wind. But something peculiar happens. As you stand beside the hole, the stars seem to waver. Not visibly, just slightly off, as though your eyes have been subtly convinced to rearrange the sky. You look through the hole. Nothing lines up. No constellation, no horizon feature, just the dark. And yet it feels placed, like someone thought about this moment before you were born and arranged the geometry for exactly this. A gift, a warning, or perhaps just a punctuation mark in the sentence of the land, a way to say, here, let the silence breathe. Historians still debate whether such holes are symbolic practical or wholly misinterpreted. Some think they were mirrors for light. Others think they were made for watching not through, but into. As if someone believed the stone would eventually look back. You crouch before it. Press your forehead gently to the rim. Nothing happens. And that's the strangest part. You half expected wind, or sound, or a vision. But instead the hole gives you permission to stop, to rest, to not know. So you do, just for a moment. You sit beside it in silence, letting your thoughts drift and dissolve. Not lost, not found, just placed, like the hole itself. When you rise, you do not say goodbye. Some silences are already complete. You pass a row of stone seats facing nothing audience council, or long wait for news. The landscape tilts gently downward, as if nudging you toward something you wouldn't have chosen on your own. The moon has finally arrived, thin, pale, more suggestion than presence, but it casts just enough light to shape the horizon. And that's when you see them. A row of stone seats just sitting there as if an audience had gathered and forgotten what they came to hear. 12 of them, carved directly into the ground, not placed. Low-backed, wide-hipped, shaped for people who knew how to sit for a long time. They're arranged in a subtle curve, not quite a half circle, not quite a line. Something in between, like punctuation in a language no longer spoken. You approach slowly. There's no fire pit, no altar, no stage, no central marker of any kind. The seats face nothing, just an open patch of dust, a few shrubs, and then the curve of the land dropping into shadow. You run your hand along the nearest seat. Cool. Smooth in places, pitted in others, as though the stone had been touched, often but not evenly. You sit. This seat fits you. Unnervingly well, you stare ahead into the blank horizon and feel a subtle pull, not physical, narrative, like something is about to happen and the desert is waiting for your reaction. Here's your historical foothold. Council circles were common among ancient communities across North America. Many were symbolic, used for storytelling, law-giving, decision-making, and public ritual. They embodied the idea of participation, not hierarchy. But most had a focal point, an object, a speaker, a fire. These don't. And yet, they feel expectant. Here's the tale. There was once a group of watchers known only as the Stayers. They were said to be chosen not for wisdom or bravery, but for their ability to wait. They sat in their circle and watched the horizon. not for enemies, not for weather, for messages, the kind that arrived without sound, without motion. When a message came, only one of them would stand and speak a single word. Then they would all leave. The desert would remember the word. No one else would. Historians still argue whether sites like these were ceremonial or contemplative. Some believe they were training grounds for dream interpreters. Others think they were punishment-forced idleness disguised as spiritual duty. You sit longer, nothing changes, and yet it does. A breeze rises, brief, hesitant. It curls around the back of your neck, like someone leaning in to whisper but forgetting the words. Then gone. Still no sound, still no wind. But the silence feels less empty now. You glance at the next seat, and the next. One of them holds something. You stand and approach. It's a small bundle wrapped in dried hide and bound with twine made of plant fiber. You pick it up. Light. You open it carefully. Inside, 12 beads. Each carved from a different material bone, turquoise obsidian shell antler, even one made from something that looks like compressed ash. They're not decorative, they're worn. Fingered often, each bead bears a single mark, a line, a dot, a curl, a spiral. 12 symbols, 12 seats. You return to your chair, hold the beads in your hand, and feel strangely included, as if the moment has looped you into a watch that never quite ended. You whisper, not loudly, not clearly, just enough, and the bead in your palm grows warm. You look ahead, still nothing, but the nothing now feels watched. You place the bundle back, rise, leave the circle with slow steps, careful not to disturb the dust. Still no wind, but as you crest the next low rise, you hear it, a single word, too distant to understand. Spoken from behind you by no one to no one. And yet, you know it wasn't meant to be heard, only said. A mosaic of shells in the middle of the desert trade tribute, or a message that failed. You descend into a shallow basin, moonlight crisp across the stone, your boots striking the earth with a kind of hushed punctuation. The land feels still, but not drained. Just holding its breath, perhaps, as though awaiting the next sentence in an unfinished story. And then you see something that has no business being here. Shells, a shimmer of them. Tiny white arcs, dull pink spirals, scalloped edges and soft ridges scattered in a wide, geometric pattern across the dusty floor. Some are cracked, some are whole, all are wrong, because you are hundreds of miles from any sea. You step closer. This isn't debris, this isn't nature being whimsical. This is a mosaic, a deliberate arrangement about the size of a dining table, formed directly on the earth. Shells set into a grid of flat stones and fine red sand. A central spiral, of course. From there, lines radiate out 4 cardinal directions with tiny shell clusters at the tips. You crouch. The spiral is made of darker shells, black-lipped, almost metallic. Each curve is exact. The craftsmanship is delicate, not sloppy, not decorative. This was done with intention. You brush some sand aside and find the base lined with crushed turquoise, so fine it glitters like frost. Here's your historical foothold. Ancient trade routes crossed the continent long before modern borders. From the Gulf of California and the Pacific coast, shells were carried eastward, sometimes over 1,000 miles, exchanged as currency ornament and sacred material. Sites across Arizona and New Mexico contain marine shells, carefully worked into jewelry charms and ceremonial tools. But this is not jewelry. This is a message, or an offering, or a memorial. There's a whispered tale told in corners of desert markets about a woman who once walked from sea to sand with a bundle of shells wrapped in oiled cloth. She spoke to no one. When asked, she pointed only to the horizon. When she arrived here, she laid out her shells in the pattern she had seen once in a dream and waited. For what a response! They say she waited until the shells stopped glinting and her voice became the wind. And even then, no reply came. Historians still debate whether these mosaics were astronomical charts, boundary markers, or ritual warnings. Some suggest they represent echoes patterns seen in the constellations recreated on Earth to attract or repel divine attention. You move clockwise around the spiral and notice a break, one quadrant of the mosaic that's been disrupted. The shells are cracked, the turquoise dulled. In their place, scattered bits of ash. Not a fire pit, not random, just wrong. You kneel and place your hand over the broken quadrant.
It's colder than the rest, as though someone interrupted the message mid-sentence. You glance up, nothing on the horizon, no movement, no shape, no answer, still no wind, but your ears feel full, as though a sound is on its way but hasn't decided whether to arrive. You whisper toward the mosaic. Did someone forget you? The shells do not reply, but one flake of turquoise shifts in the dust. Just a twitch. Could have been gravity, could have been something else. You gather a single, unbroken shell from the rim, small pink like a delicate ear, and hold it to your own. You hear nothing, but your skin warms faintly. Not comfort, not threat, permission. You replace the shell gently, then brush the sand smooth again with your hand, the way you'd smooth a child's blanket after a nightmare. You rise, leave the mosaic intact, step lightly back toward the edge of the basin. You look back just once. And in that moment, the moonlight hits the spiral, perfectly casting its pattern outward in all directions, as if trying one last time to be understood. And then as you turn away, one shell cracks, a small sound, but final. Like the punctuation at the end of a letter that was never read. The path forks beside a boulder painted with eyes, guardian warning, or simple loneliness. You climb out of the basin with the memory of shells still glittering behind your eyes. The moon glides higher, pale and off-center like a half-remembered face in a dream you didn't expect to return to. The desert doesn't sleep, it just slows, smooths its thoughts, stretches its silence. And then the path forks. One way slips downward into a narrow cut of stone, shadowed and still. The other climbs a low ridge, scattered with broken shale. But your eyes don't go to the paths. They go to the boulder.
Squatting between the forks, unmoved and unmovable, is a squat, round boulder the size of a small car. Not jagged, not threatening, just there. Except for the eyes, painted in faded red and ochre across its surface, dozens of them. Big ones, small ones, almond-shaped, round, slit-pupilled. Some stacked, some single. Some with lashes drawn like rays, others just pupils hovering inside blank sockets. Most are faded with time, wind, sun, but a few look fresh. You freeze, not out of fear, but because the sheer quantity of them feels like someone overcompensating, or someone who wanted to make sure no one would ever look away. You approach slowly. The eyes don't seem to follow you, not quite, but it's close. You reach out to the boulder. Its surface is warm, not just from the day's heat, warm like skin. You sit down across from it, gaze level, and now the placement becomes clear. It's facing both forks, perfectly centered, a century. But watching what here's your historical anchor across the southwest, painted and carved eyes appear in petroglyphs, murals, even pottery. In many cultures, they represent divine perception, vigilance, or a spirit's ability to see into other realms. Among the Zuni and Hopi, the all-seeing eye often signifies a presence that watches over both natural and supernatural affairs. Now for the fringe story, there was once a traveller who lost his memory in the desert. Not his name or his family, his direction. He couldn't remember which way he was going or why. He wandered until he came upon a great stone with a single eye painted on it. He asked it, "Where should I go?" The stone said nothing. So he painted another eye, and waited, still nothing. So he painted another, and another, until the whole boulder was covered. Then he sat down and waited to be told. But the story doesn't end with a voice. It ends with the line. When others arrived, they didn't ask the stone. They asked the man. Historians still argue whether such tales reflect ritual practice trauma response or symbolic architecture of sacred crossroads. Some believe the painted eyes were mimetic devices meant to focus thought during prayer or trance. You look again at the forks, neither feels heavier, neither pulls at your senses. You say aloud left or right. The boulder does not answer, but one of the smaller eyes, barely visible, catches moonlight just right. You walk over to it. Beside that eye, scratched in low relief, is a small symbol, a spiral broken by a vertical slash. You've seen that before, once etched into bone, once in ash, a sign of interruption. You step toward the right-hand path. The boulder hums. No, not hums. Resists. You take a step back. Then turn to the left path, the one that dips into shadow. Nothing happens. No sound. No sign. But your gut says this is the one. Not because the rock told you, because it didn't. You glance back one last time at the boulder, those eyes, hundreds of them. Now it seems gazing in every direction and none. Still no wind. But something in your chest stirs. A memory, a knowing. Maybe the eyes aren't watching you. Maybe they're watching what follows you. You take the left-hand path. The darkness ahead is gentle, and not a single eye blinks. A narrow cleft contains carvings of figures, upside-down ritual rebellion, or misremembered story. The left-hand path closes in fast. What began as a dip between stone walls becomes a narrow cleft, the kind of passage that makes you move sideways and hold your breath at odd angles. Moonlight barely reaches in now. You move by feel-gloved fingers, brushing cool stone boots, crunching softly on sand, so fine it's practically dust. And then you see them, carvings, dozens, lining both walls just above shoulder height, as if placed for someone kneeling or someone who used to be taller. Figures etched in low relief, worn smooth but unmistakable in their shape. Human, animal, hybrid, and all of them are upside down. You blink. At first you think it's a trick of orientation. But no, the feet are where the heads should be. Arms droop upward, eyes carved under chins. Even the animals are inverted snakes, coiled the wrong way birds, with wings folded beneath their claws. Coyotes balanced on their noses like circus performers trapped in stone. You reach out and touch one. The figure is humanoid, tall and narrow, with 3 fingers on each hand and a spiral where its mouth should be. Above its head now at the bottom is a small etched shape, a crescent moon pointing upward, like a smile, but also like a trap. Here's your historical foothold across the southwest, especially in Chaco Canyon, and Canyonland's petroglyphs and pictographs include mysterious humanoid figures with unusual proportions, elongated limbs, antennae-like adornments, and non-standard anatomy. Scholars have long debated their meaning, gods, ancestors, spirits, or something else entirely. But the inverted figures, those are rare and usually considered taboo. There's a whispered tale told only when the moon is new of a canyon where a great story was told backward on purpose. The people, having grown tired of war and weather and prophecy, decided to retell their history in reverse as a challenge to the spirits. If everything had failed going forward, perhaps it might succeed going back. They carved the figures upside down to show they were unmaking the past. But halfway through the retelling, something stopped them, and the canyon was sealed. Historians still argue whether inverted carvings indicate ritual banishment, mental illness, or political revolt. Some believe these figures represent not spirits, but echoes the impressions left by people deliberately forgotten. You follow the cleft deeper. The air cools with each step, dry but not dead. There's a sound now, soft, rhythmic, dripping. But there's no water. The stone feels damp near your fingers. You bring one to your nose. It smells faintly of iron and clay like blood, trying to remember it was once soil. You reach a widening in the passage. Here the inverted figures gather in a dense, crowded line. One overlaps another. Some are carved hastily, others with reverent detail. At the center is a figure unlike the rest. It's not upside down, it's not right side up. It's sideways, crawling. Its limbs stretch into the walls themselves, fingers thinning into cracks as if the being was trying to become the canyon or escape from it. You step closer and see that this figure has no spiral, no crescent, no eyes. Just an open mouth. And inside the mouth, a tiny hole, a perfectly round depression, no larger than a coin, bored deep into the wall. You place your palm near it. The stone pulls. Not strongly, just enough to feel like air is escaping, like the canyon is still telling the story, backward one whisper at a time. Still no wind. But you hear something then, behind you. A single word spoken slowly. Wait. You turn. No one. You whisper back. Why no answer? But the carvings seem quieter now, like they've noticed you. Not with malice, not with interest. Just acknowledgement. You walk the length of the cleft one last time, fingers brushing the inverted figures. You do not count them. You do not name them. You simply pass. And at the far end of the canyon, where the cleft spits you back into starlight, you look over your shoulder. The carvings do not move, but you swear you hear them breathe backward. An abandoned loom strung with spider silk, forgotten work patient weaving, or desert prophecy. Beyond the cleft of inverted figures, the desert opens again, not wide, not sweeping, but intimate. Like a courtyard meant for someone who never came. The moon is soft now, the color of worn paper, and the stars seem to hush themselves out of respect for what's ahead. You walk along a ridge of packed earth until something catches the light. Threads. At first you think it's cactus fluff or the filament of some windblown plant. But as you approach it, resolves into something far stranger. A loom, standing in the open. Roughly 6 feet tall, framed by weathered wooden beams tied with sinew and cracked rope, it's half buried in silt and surrounded by fallen stones. But the threads, oh the threads, they're intact. And they glisten. Delicate strands stretch across the frame, too fine to be cotton, too strong for age. You lean close and see them shimmer in moonlight like frosted glass. You test one with your finger, not sticky, not brittle, just cool and alive. Spider silk. or something like it. Here's your historical grounding looms have long played sacred roles in the Southwest. The Navajo, Hopi, and Zuni peoples treated weaving not only as craft, but as a spiritual act. Each thread held stories of land of ancestors of breath. In Navajo tradition, the holy people gave the loom as a gift, and Spider Woman taught them to weave meaning into matter. But this loom, it's not for cloth. There is no shuttle, no spindle, no pattern. The strands stretch across the frame in no discernible order, forming not a grid, but a constellation, scattered yet intentional. Some threads overlap, others curve. It looks less like weaving and more like a map. You step closer. One of the threads hums, only for a second, faint high like a mosquito that's read too much poetry. You lean in. Each strand catches moonlight at different angles, forming shadows across the sand that move. Not with wind, but with memory. You crouch. Beneath the loom, someone has drawn a spiral in ash. Faint now, but unmistakable. And beside it, a small collection of objects. A polished stone shaped like a tooth, a strip of woven bark, a single eyelash curled and preserved inside a hollowed bead. This is no accident. It's a working, and not one you're meant to finish. There's an old story, not a legend, a whisper. They say that once every few generations a weaver begins a piece they cannot end, not because of death or war or forgetfulness, but because the loom itself refused, the pattern unraveled, the threads tangled of their own accord. The weaver left, and the loom it waited, until someone else arrived, not to weave, just to witness. Historians still debate whether certain abandoned looms were part of ritual cycles or evidence of interrupted craftsmanship. But some archaeologists quietly, cautiously note the presence of non-local silks and materials in remote loom sites, substances not native to desert life, as if the loom was waiting for something more than human. You rise and place your hand near the frame. The threads vibrate, not randomly. One, then two, then a third, forming a triangle of sound, each tone pure, measured, hollow. You feel it in your ribs, a message maybe, but not for your language, still no wind. But something in the thread seems to gather like an idea, remembering it was once spoken aloud. Then stillness, you look up. Above you, the stars now mirror the pattern of the loom. Exactly. You laugh. Just once, because it feels like the desert is showing off. And then one thread breaks. It snaps with a soft, perfect sound curling in the air before drifting to the ground like a falling eyelash. You watch it land. And nothing happens, because that was the happening. The loom remains, incomplete, intact. You leave the spiral undisturbed. You walk away without touching another thread. Some stories aren't told in words. They're held in tension. And if you pull too hard, they forget you. You meet a figure wrapped in dust who asks no questions. Guide, ghost, or reflection. The land levels out again, spreading like a sigh. The moon hangs low now, its light soft as sleep, dusting everything in a velvet glow. You walk with lighter steps, not because you're less tired, but because the ground has started to recognize you. And then ahead, just beyond a spindly cluster of rock, someone is sitting, not standing, not moving, just sitting, cross-legged on a flat stone, arms folded loosely in their lap. You freeze instinctively, breath caught in your throat, heart thudding once, twice, three times in exaggerated percussion. You scan the figure, wrapped in fabric, pale cloth tattered, and sand-worn draped over shoulders, chest, head, no skin visible, no color. Everything on them is dust-colored, stone-colored, moon-colored. You take one step forward. They do not flinch. You take another. Still. At 10 paces you stop. Their head tilts slightly.
Not toward you, but toward the sky, as if watching something that hasn't arrived yet, or that passed long ago and just now made sense. You speak softly hello. They do not respond, but neither do they vanish. You sit across from them. And now you notice there's no shadow from their body. Only yours stretches over the stone, long and uncertain. You lean closer. Their chest moves, breathing or remembering how to. Here's your historical foothold. Desert peoples across the world have told of wanderers figures who appear at thresholds between settlements between worlds. They are not always spirits, sometimes they are real, sometimes only real for a moment. Guides, guardians, judges, or simply witnesses. And here's the story. The Painted Desert is said to contain one listener wrapped in time who has heard every traveler's final thought. Not their last words, their last unsaid words. The ones buried under breath, under hunger, under maps. They do not offer advice.
They do not collect secrets. They simply wait. And when the desert has had enough, they disappear, only to reappear at the next fork in someone else's story. Historians still debate whether such figures are metaphors, hallucinations, or manifestations of silence itself. Some note that ancient murals depict seated figures covered in white pigment faces, blank hands resting on their knees, no name, no task, just presence. You reach into your pouch. You have nothing to offer, except your silence. You place it carefully between you, not a word, not a gesture, just a stillness. The figure tilts their head toward you, and for one breathless instant you see your own eyes beneath the dust shroud, not mirrored, not copied, just possible. Then the figure lowers their head again, waiting. You rise, and as you turn to leave, you hear their voice, not with your ears, in your chest, a whisper, dry as old paper, soft as wind that never quite arrives. It says, you asked why the wind would not cross. You stop, turn back, the figure is gone. Only dust where they sat, and a faint ring of stones surrounding the place. You do not disturb them. Still no wind. But in your body you feel the answer. Because some stories are so old even the wind pauses just to listen. You arrive at the painted desert's edge. No wind, no answer, only the hush of becoming. The land rises slowly, like the final stanza of a long-forgotten poem. Your steps grow quieter, not out of caution but a reverence. You've crossed spirals and bones, flame pits and looms strung with silk, and now the desert unfolds one last hush before the punctuation mark. And there it is, the edge. Not a cliff. Not a line in the sand, but a moment where the earth opens wide and decides not to speak anymore. You step onto a flat shelf of rock that overlooks an impossible expanse, miles of painted stone ochre and rose and ash grey rolling like a sea that forgot how to crash. No signposts, no markers, no throne, no voice, and still everything is listening. You sit, you've earned that much, there is no wind, but your heartbeat is quieter now, not from fatigue, but permission. The painted desert is not silent, it is holding its breath, not in fear, in ceremony. You remember every fragment, the upside-down carvings, the waiting circle, the spiral in ash, the shell mosaic that cracked itself open like a final sigh. Each piece brought you here, not for an answer, but for the space just before an answer. Here's your final historical echo. The Hopi word for desert doesn't mean emptiness, it means waiting place, a space between, a condition of openness, not absence. The desert is not what's left after life leaves, it's what stays still enough to become sacred. And the story. There is one final tale whispered by those who never write it down. They say the wind once loved the painted desert, spoke to it, carried its dust across canyons and crops, painted murals across canyon walls with whispers and pressure. But one day the desert asked a question the wind could not answer. And in that moment, the wind stopped, not in anger, not in fear, but in awe. And it has been listening ever since. You lie back, spine pressed, to sun-warmed stone eyes open to a sky so large it forgets itself. You feel it now. That final answer isn't an answer at all, it's being here. And then the wind moves, just once. A soft exhale across your brow. Not a gust, not a storm, a touch. And then nothing. So now you lie on the edge of the painted desert, your breath sinking with the land beneath you. The stars have shifted again gently, like chairs being tucked in after a long, silent gathering. No more walking, no more wondering. Your feet are still. Your hands are warm. Your thoughts have softened into something slower than language. The desert no longer waits for your question. It has already heard it. It's cradled in the hush of canyons, in the absence of the wind, in the memory of stone tools still dreaming of calloused hands. Nothing rushes, not now. Let the silence stretch. Let your heartbeat fall in line with the rhythm of the long, unwinding earth. If you listen not with your ears, but with that part of you that remembers shadows, you might hear the tiniest spiral being drawn in the sand beside you. No one sees it. But the desert does. It always has. Let your shoulders soften. Let your breath lengthen. Let go of the footsteps behind you. The painted desert will hold them for you. You are not alone. You are not unfinished. You are simply here, still. And that is more than enough. The wind has not crossed, but you have. So close your eyes. Let the hush settle into your bones.
And sleep, dreamer, sleep. End of script. Sweet dreams.